Like that's any different than any other day.
No.
And we are live. Welcome to the MLB Deeper Dive. It is Tuesday, September 20th. I am Josh Engleman. I am joined by Adam Scherer. Man, it sucks to talk. We are brought to you by Prize Picks. 11-game MLB slate today. Weird one in terms of pitching. Ownership is sort of just odd to me as I take my first look at it because I did not do the strategy show this morning, but that's fine. Now that I'm here, you guys can hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when everything goes live. Adam, what's up? What's going on? I haven't talked to you in ages on the show.
Yeah, I'll say I feel like it's been a while because we don't do the Monday review show together anymore. They put Eric in there. Yes,
I don't want to review my NFL lineups from Monday, so I'm glad I wasn't there.
I did not want to do that show yesterday. Yeah, so I guess, I haven't talked to you since what, Sunday?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I forgot we did that Sunday show.
Yeah.
I was legitimately going all the way back to like sometime last week of baseball in my head.
Yeah, well, because 9 in the morning on Sunday, I'm half asleep. I barely even remember it.
That NFL slate was rough.
It was really bad. It was also like my least favorite kind of slate because not only did I get my ass kicked, but it was one of those where like enough chalk plays failed that the people that like barely play DFS and just tweet stuff are like convinced that if only they played DFS, they would have won because like the chalk failed and the low owned guys they like did well. When realistically, like you still had to put together a really good lineup around Tua or Lamar. Like, like I had a lot of Lamar on FanDuel and I lost because I also happened to have a lot of like Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley because I'm a normal person that plays those guys. So I hate weeks like that where it's like people I follow on Twitter that don't actually play DFS think they would have crushed, and every good player got their ass kicked.
It was brutal. And then the worst part of it all was that it got so much worse as it went on. Like, obviously, like that's how it happens. But then all of a sudden, like Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill just immediately have, 40 fantasy points apiece. Lamar's going crazy.
Yeah.
Tua obviously attached to those guys.
Yeah. Well, and then even in the first game, it was almost reminiscent. I know you don't play college football, but Saturday, I played one player in college football above 30%. And he was really popular. I had like 85%. His game had a 60-point total. The game had 19 points at halftime. This guy obviously sucked. Second half, the entire rest of the game goes off except for him. And I was pretty much under on the rest of the game. And the same exact thing happens in the Washington game where I didn't really play Washington. They have like 25 yards in the first half. I'm like, all right, whatever. At least my chalk plays suck, but so do these. And then Carson Wentz just throws for like 1,000,000 yards in the second half. The whole game gets there. And it's just like, oh, this just happened yesterday.
Well, now we can just talk a little bit about baseball. That's way easier. Did you do this show this morning?
I did.
Okay, so you know what's going on here. Let's just get into it. We've got 11 games to get through, 55 minutes to do so. Hit that like button as we get started. We're going to kick it off. Yankees and Pirates. 5-run implied total for the Yanks, 2.9 for the Pirates. Nestor Cortez and Luis Ortiz. Ortiz pulling no ownership at 6,500. Cortez, one of three guys in the 9K range, just soaking up everything. 27% owned right now, but I actually like Cortez, even though he is 9,800, the most expensive of the 9Ks. I think I like him the most relative to salary because he's only 27% owned, where we get someone like Luis Castillo, who's 65% owned. So like I like Cortez in GPPs just because he doesn't appear to be getting as much ownership as the other two guys.
Would it change your opinion if you knew that in the two starts since he came back from injury, he's thrown 58 and 65 pitches?
No.
Really?
Yeah, of course it would, man. I had no idea.
Because that, to me, that's the really difficult part. Like, I have a hard time really expecting more than 80 or so pitches out of him, but he's also facing Pittsburgh, so those 80 pitches can still go a really long way. It just makes me think that the ownership is pretty much where it should be. Like, you have Castillo and Morton, both on teams that have, massive playoff implications, and then also not in their third start back from an injury. Whereas you have Cortez coming off of 58 and 65 pitches. And then the Yankees, they haven't clinched anything, but they do have a 5.5 game lead in the division. They're probably not going to melt it all the way, even though they're trying really hard. Terry did make the point this morning, or mention this morning, that Cortez did come out for the 6th inning last start, put a couple of guys on base. Aaron Boone took him out. So that does make me a little bit more optimistic about his pitch count. It wasn't like a hard 65 cap. It was you're somewhat limited and you also are now in trouble and we're going to take you out situation. So I don't think it's like a huge concern. I think it's just a concern in the sense that when you compare him to Castillo and Morton, I think it does put him a step behind them, simply because I wouldn't be surprised if he's just on a little bit shorter leash.
Is that enough to make up for the giant gap in ownership?
I think it kind of just makes it correct.
Okay.
Like, he's probably still going a little bit under owned compared to those guys, but the combination of him being a little bit more expensive and me not being quite as confident in his leash makes me think that, 30% ownership or so is around where he should be.
Well, the last time that I had this kind of take, boy, was I right about the pitcher, and boy, was I wrong about when he was going to leave the game.
I was going to say, yeah, we both kind of nailed that one where I said, it doesn't matter what he's doing. He's not going deep into the game. And then he threw a no-hitter for 5 innings and came out.
Yeah. So do we feel the same way here? Does Nestor Cortes throw a 5-inning no-hitter against
and
the
you
Pirates?
Probably aren't aware, but Scherzer did the same thing yesterday.
I did not know that.
It was a similar situation with Scherzer where it was like, I don't think he's on like a short leash, but I don't think he's throwing a complete game. And he threw like 68 pitches in 6 innings, no hitter, perfect game, got taken out, scored like, 30 something fantasy points in 6 innings. So yeah, 2 in a row now where this type of guy has just thrown a no hitter and been great. But the other thing is on this slate, the pitching is not great. So it makes it a little bit easier to get to Cortes as well. He's somebody that in general, I feel like has been difficult to get to recently or a lot of the season because he's typically priced correctly and you'll have somebody, 1 or 2 like other legitimate aces on the slate that aren't that much more expensive. But here you have, Cease in a really tough spot for 1,200 more. You have Castillo and Morton, but they're both pulling a ton of ownership. So, you can certainly use Cortes as a pivot. And then there's kind of not much else in that talent range.
Yeah, I cut him down by another third of an inning. So I have him in 5 1/3, which I don't think is too crazy. But I think the real appeal here is just the fact that the Pittsburgh Pirates are dog shit and their strikeout rate is really high.
Yeah, 80 pitches. Let's just call it 80, and that's not an official number or hard cap rating. 80 pitches still goes pretty far against the Pirates.
Absolutely. Ortiz against the Yanks.
I'm good. Decent Double-A numbers for him, but he's made, I believe, 3 total appearances above Double-A. 2 starts at Triple-A this year. 1 start, 5 2/3 with the Pirates. 114 in the 3rd innings at Double-A. 3.76 xFIP, struck out 26.9% of hitters. Double-A is a very long way away from Yankee Stadium.
Sure is. Let's talk about those Yankees bats. 6th in top stack, 7th in ownership, basically the same numbers there. Not the greatest value in the world. That shouldn't be all that surprising, but I think they look good. And at low ownership, I am getting north of the field on the Yankees by quite a bit.
Yeah, I like the Yankees here too. It's weird with them. Terry and I were talking about it this morning. Like, they always look good, but it's just for different reasons. Now they look good because you got Anthony Rizzo back, so this lineup gets deeper. Now you have Judge, Rizzo, Torres, Donaldson, Stanton, 1 through 6. Harrison Bader is back as well. He's not a great hitter, but he does have some power and speed. Nice combination at 2,600. So in recent games, the Yankees would look pretty good because they were cheap outside of Judge and Stanton, but they also weren't very good. Now they're just instantly better when you get Rizzo back in there, but they're also a little bit more expensive. But I don't think it's going to be that difficult to find value with, secondary stacks or anything on this slate. And the fact that you have Coors Field is just going to drive down that ownership a bit against a pitcher that hasn't really pitched above Double-A.
Yeah, I have 14% in the aggregate here of the Yankees, so a little bit over 2x the field. That is always a great feeling to know that I'm getting to the Yankees at lower ownership. And we'll definitely be talking about a game that's getting a lot of ownership in a bit. Do you have any interest here in the Pirates?
No.
That's fine with me. I don't need to follow up.
Yeah, like if I had to talk about the Pirates, you do have a cheap Michael Chavis, Castro's cheap, Brian Reynolds is good, but Cortes does a good job limiting power to both sides of the plate. You have an 11-game slate where one game in particular is pulling a massive amount of ownership, so it just naturally pushes down everything else. And also, it's an 11-game slate, so it's just not that difficult to find low-owned guys. There's not a huge difference to me between getting, that makes me want the Pirates at 1% instead of some other better team at 3.5%.
I'm going to ask you a 2-part question. It's not important. What do you think O'Neill Cruz's on-base percentage is this season?
Anywhere.
300 plate appearances.
How many?
300.
His on-base percentage?
Yeah.
280?
268. His WRC plus?
82.
100 on the dot. Didn't know that was possible.
Yeah, I was gonna say I really had no feel for what he's actually done. I just know that I thought he in general had struggled a bit, but also just has like already a ton of highlight level plays.
Yeah. 17 dongs, which is, I think, helping here. A couple stolen bases,
Yes,
not helping
17 home
WRC.
runs.
Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, 100 WRC plus. His slugging is 200 points above that. Just weird. Let's go to your Orioles taking on the Tigers. 4.7 run implied total for the O's, 3.5 for the Tigers. Austin Voth and Joey Wentz. No ownership going to Wentz. No real ownership going to Voth. He's 7% owned at 6,700. I have a feeling you're going to tell me you want a little bit more. And based on our top pitchers tool, we probably should.
Yeah, I have a little bit of interest at the low ownership. I'm not really confident in how deep into the game he goes, but I do like the fact that 2 starts ago he threw 88 pitches. Then he had a 1 inning relief appearance, 17 pitches. I would expect the Orioles are happy if they can get 5, maybe 6 innings out of him. But at this price tag and low ownership against the Tigers, I do think he's a good enough pitcher to have some interest in. As a starter this year, 21.4% strikeout percentage, 4.2 xFIP, good matchup against the Tigers. It's not somebody that I'm like going out of my way to prioritize on this slate, but I do think that with all of the ownership coming in the Castillo and Morton, and then to a lesser extent, you're still getting 25 to 30% on Cortez and Sandoval. If you're going to Coors Field, for example, and you're just trying to get away from some pitcher ownership, I do think Austin Voth gives you solid upside and just the ability to get a different roster construction.
Okay. We're not talking about Wentz, right?
No.
8th in top stack, 10th in ownership. That would be your Orioles. How do you see them for today? Doesn't seem like a major priority, but I can say I'm slightly over the field.
Yeah, I mean, I like that they're not really getting much ownership. I like that they have like a 5 implied run total. Wentz has made 4 starts in the major leagues now, 17 innings pitched, 3.79 xFIP, striking out 21.5% of hitters. Zips projects him for an 18.2% strikeout percentage going forward, 5.44 FIP. So at least they expect that he's sort of been overperforming. But either way, like even if you just take his numbers that he's put up in the major league so far and say that he's just a decent pitcher, you still have a lot of upside with the Orioles. They are relatively inexpensive. They have Gunnar Henderson leading off, which is odd. He has struggled with left-handed pitching in the minors. That's been like his one flaw. So I'm kind of surprised that this is where they decided to bat him leadoff. But you have him at 3,900, third base, shortstop. There's no Cedric Mullins in the lineup, which means he's probably coming in for Ryan McKenna later in the game. But it also means that you can stack the top of this order at a lot less salary, or without Mullins at least. So interesting lineup there. You have Rutschman hitting 4th from his weaker side, but yeah, I don't know. It's I don't think they should be really popular, but I do think that at the 4% ownership mark, they're kind of interesting. Like things working against them, in addition to the fact that Wentz has just been decent. You do have right-handed bats playing in, Camden Yards plays a lot less favorably for right-handed bats than left-handed bats. And you're just getting right-handed bats here. Then you have Rutschman, like I said, on the wrong side of his platoon split. So that makes it a little bit weaker, but it's still a lot of guys with power and some speed at very little ownership against an unproven pitcher.
Anything here for the Tigers, who are a decent value stack, but not much else?
Yeah, I do like that they have left-handed power bats that play better in Camden Yards. Voth this year has allowed a 170 expected ISO to lefties. I don't think the Tigers are any sort of a priority on a slate this size, but I do sort of like the construction of their lineup with Riley Green, Castro, and Carpenter all in the top 6.
Julio G with the super chat said, "Sup fellas, can you list sports by most variant to least? MLB, NBA, NFL, and NHL? And what is your unique setting on NFL? Sorry, I just don't see you guys on NFL stuff. My setting for uniques is 1 for everything that I do, no matter what. Most variant to least variant is basically just going to be MLB, NFL, and NHL in one box, and then NBA in a different one."
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure there is an answer, but it probably depends on what positions you're talking about. And I don't know the specific answer. I do know that it is those 3. Like they're all just very similar event-driven sports. NHL, you need goals. NFL, you need touchdowns. MLB, you need home runs. And then NBA is not event-driven. It's just basket after basket after basket. It's all of those 3, much more variant than NBA. I use one unique for NFL as well, but this is another one like that's not the correct answer. It's just what works for me. I use enough randomness. I have enough stuff in place that I still get differentiation in my lineups. If you're finding that you're getting too much overlap, but you don't want to increase your randomness because, then you're getting really weak lineups, then by all means, like, you can increase it to 3 or something like that. Like, NFL is a sport where I don't mind the idea of having more uniques. I think Steve had talked about it in, I don't know, office hours maybe at one point, that he views it like MMA. He definitely uses one unique because you really need to build the optimal lineup in MMA. In NFL, you're not trying to build the optimal lineup. You're just trying to get close enough. Nobody ever builds the actual optimal lineup. So you can get away with more uniques there if you need to. For me, I just kind of don't need to.
Yeah. I think the key there is basically like, if you don't ever want to put yourself in a position where you can't generate the optimal in a sport where it could be necessary. Right. So, like a showdown slates, like a 2-gamer of some garbage, whatever sport it's actually going to be in this case. MMA is another good example there. Because you could set that to 2 uniques and legitimately not have the opportunity to ever generate that actual lineup. But otherwise, for me, I use so much randomness that I don't change it off of 1.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. If you are someone that changes up your uniques, like it isn't always 1, you're gonna want to lower that on smaller slates, just because you don't want to be creating like the 9,000th best lineup when you're building 1,000 lineups or whatever.
Exactly. Larry wants to know if we use different randomness for different positions or anything like that. Mine's all set individual. Every individual player has something different generally, depending on the sport.
I'll say yes and no for me, because like the standard deviations for pitchers are typically going to be different than for hitters, and for quarterbacks it's going to be different than wide receivers, and I use that individually. But it's not like I go in and set anything. If you're using a generic randomness, I would say like you probably should be using, I don't know, half for pitchers that you are for bats, something like that.
Because of the amount of lineups I crunch, like most of the answers here aren't going to be super relevant for most people. But like for NFL, I just put 200 on everybody because I don't care, because I'm generating as much as I can. For MMA, I could put whatever I want there. I'm generating 10,000 lineups. Like I need volume as fast as I can. All right, schedule for the rest of the day. Pretty simple. MLB Live Before Lock coming up next, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And then for free content, we've got the MLB Top Stacks tool, along with the PGA Top Golfers tool. Braves and Nats, 5.3 run implied total for the Braves, 3 for the Nats. Charlie Morton and Patrick Corbin. Corbin unowned at 5,500. Charlie Morton, slightly different, 9K, 51% owned. Feels a tad high here for Charlie Morton, but I completely understand why it's happening.
Yeah, it's just another situation. We've seen it a decent amount recently with pitching, where I don't love playing Charlie Morton at 51% ownership. Nothing against Morton, just it's 51% ownership. But I don't really know where to go as a pivot either that makes me really happy. Like Nestor Cortez is getting plenty of ownership. Patrick Sandoval is getting plenty of ownership. So I think it's likely that, and I think that most pitching on this slate sucks. So for me, it's most likely that I end up just sucking it up and getting to Morton, getting to Castillo, getting to, Cortez, and then being a little bit different with bats. Again, that's not necessarily the correct approach. It's just, there's different ways you can approach these things. It is a spot sort of where, I talked about it before. If you're trying to go back and like learn from other players and see what they did, you're going to see some good players probably that are under the field on Morton. You're going to see some that are over the field, but it's all like how everything comes together. So my Morton exposure basically will be dictated by what I end up doing with bats. If I end up just jamming in the Giants, I'm going to have less Morton. I think it's more likely I end up playing a lot of Morton and just differentiating with bats.
Yeah, on my crunch, I only got 40%, which isn't really all that surprising, but clearly have to get there. I'm getting to Cortez, I'm getting to Castillo, I'm getting to Morton. I don't really see a way around it. Do you see any path to Patrick Corbin?
No. I mean, he's somebody that I have actually been rostering a decent amount recently. He's always really cheap. He's not ever getting ownership, but here it's just such a difficult matchup against the Braves. I think it's pretty tough. And it's probably also not totally necessary. And then like also, for example, you have Austin Voth, who, he's $1,200 more expensive, but when you're talking $6,700 to $5,500, it probably isn't going to matter that much. He's only getting 6% ownership. If you really want an unknown pitcher, you have Dre Jameson in a really difficult spot, but we know he has a hell of a lot more arm talent than Patrick Corbin does at this point. So even that's somebody I'd probably rather gamble on. So I think it's a case where Corbin is underpriced in the sense that he projects for like 2x his salary and certainly gives you some upside just because it's baseball and he's fully stretched out. But this doesn't strike me as a slate where I'm likely to get to him, even though I don't think he is as bad as his numbers have been this year. I still don't think he's very good.
Okay. Let's talk Braves bats. Fourth in top stack, second in ownership, even with their 21st rank in value today. Are you seeing Atlanta the same way as the public? Because this feels like a slightly over-owned spot, and it's not just Acuna.
It's a lot of Acuna, though. Acuna's at 24%, Swanson's at 18%, Riley and d'Arnaud both double digits, but then Contreras at 7%, Matt Olson at 4%, Grissom at 2%, Michael Harris at 4%. I think the Braves are low-owned enough at the bottom of the order that I still like them as a stack, and I like them as one-offs if you have, or a secondary stack, if you have a lower-owned primary stack, because Corbin has, I said I don't think he's been as bad. His underlying numbers aren't as bad as his actual numbers this year. His underlying numbers to righties, though, are absolute garbage. 240 expected ISO, 396 expected WOBA. It's a really good spot for Atlanta, and I do like just sort of that you can mix and match these guys and get some low-owned bats in there as well. So I do like Atlanta. One thing I am a little concerned about, and this has been the case for a while, San Francisco's ownership has come down since this morning. I'm still not convinced they're twice as popular as Atlanta. We saw it yesterday. Atlanta basically had the same ownership as San Francisco. We've seen that on a lot of slates where I think people are just good enough or aware enough, at least, of ownership these days that even though San Francisco should probably be twice as popular as Atlanta, I think there's a good chance you see them both end up coming in around like 15% or at least closer than we have right now. So that's actually probably my biggest concern with Atlanta, is that you just end up getting a little bit more on them than we're projecting.
All right. I don't get the sense you're going to the Nats today.
No, I have a tough time getting there. Morton's had some issues with left-handed power this year, but there's basically none of that in the Nats lineup. They have Garcia, Hernandez, Abrams, Vargas from the left side, but none of those guys really have a lot of power. So outside of what happens if Charlie Morton absolutely sucks, I don't have a good case to make for the Nats.
500 people in here, just 75 likes. Let's go ahead and hit that thumbs up. Let's get that number north of 100 as we go to Brewers and Mets. Now we're going to start talking about some games that are really weird to talk about. 3.9 run implied total for the Brewers, 4 for the Mets. Aaron Ashby and Carlos Carrasco. Ashby, no ownership. Carrasco, no ownership. Do you have any interest in paying up for Carrasco against the Brewers?
Not really on DraftKings. 10-4 is a really tough price tag to get to, I think. For one, it's a negative park shift for him. Milwaukee's got a lot of power. Carrasco's got a 24% strikeout percentage, which is fine, but it's behind Cortez, it's behind Castillo, it's behind Morton, it's behind Cease, and it's just a really difficult price tag. And then also, if you're paying up to be contrarian, which would be the argument for Carrasco, like the argument for Carrasco is basically pitching's pretty thin on this slate. Everybody's going to Castillo, everybody's going to Morton. It's not hard to like if Carrasco goes and gets 25, 26 points, which he certainly can, it's not hard to think that he just ends up being like the highest scoring pitcher and you're in really good shape. But I think that with Dylan Cease getting 7% ownership at only $600 more, if I'm going to play that game, I think I would rather get the Cease first since he has the better strikeout stuff. So I think it's tough for me to get the Carrasco there. Where I really am interested is FanDuel. $9,100 price tag on him. We only have him projected for like 0.5% ownership. I don't really know why. He's not, obviously it's a one pitcher site, so ownership's going to come down, but we have Cortez at 8%, Sandoval's at 7%. I don't think Carrasco is wildly different than those guys. He certainly shouldn't be a 30-1 dog to Charlie Morton. So if you're playing Carrasco, I actually really like it on FanDuel.
There we go. Do you like getting to anything else in this game? I'm just opening it up now. Brewers are 16th in top stack, 14th in ownership. Mets are 10th and 15th. Is there anything here?
Not that I really like. I mean, the Mets are getting 1% ownership. They're a good offense. It's a nice park shift for them. So that makes them look decent. It's not a very appealing spot. You're getting Aaron Ashby opening. We know he's good. I think you're supposed to get Brent Suter behind him. But either way, you're getting a bullpen game. They do have Mark Vientos hitting 7th. He's 2K flat with third base shortstop eligibility, so that's nice. But overall, it's a pretty expensive top of the order and not a great spot. So it would purely just be taking Mets talent at low ownership. And then kind of similarly on the other side, the Brewers don't stand out on this slate because there are so many bad pitchers and they're facing Carrasco, but he has had some issues with left-handed power in particular. He is getting a negative park shift, 192 expected ISO to lefties this year. You have Christian Yelich, you have Rowdy Tellez. Their price tags have come down a little bit as well. You have Colton Wong hitting 5th. So I do individually like those guys a little bit. And then, Adames obviously always gives you a lot of upside as well. So at no ownership, I don't hate the idea. I just think that it's going to be kind of difficult for me to actually get there in practice once I start, putting lineups in.
Yeah, I got to 3% Brewers, 1% Mets. I don't really have much that I could talk about in this one. I got to a little bit of Carrasco, nothing crazy. Angelo with the super chat said, thanks for the videos. Finished tied for first place last night in Bill's showdown. Set the lineup while in line at Disneyland after he forgot he reserved a spot. That'll work.
Sounds like a good day.
Yeah, that's not too bad. What were you in line for? That's what I want to know.
Have you
One of
been
those
to
giant
Disneyland?
turkey
Is the
legs?
answer going to matter to you?
What?
Have you been to Disneyland?
I don't know. If he's just like it was Space Mountain, that's fun. I don't know.
Okay, well, yeah, I don't even know if that's at Disneyland. Like, I know it's
Neither do I.
Okay.
I don't even know which one's which.
Disneyland is California. Disney World is Florida.
Yeah, I only
Have you
picture
been
the
to
Florida one. Yeah, the Florida one.
Okay.
I only picture the Florida one because I'm from the East Coast.
Well, that was my
So,
entire point. When you asked what ride it was, I was guessing you had never been to Disneyland because it's on the West Coast.
I have no idea. I forget that they have different names.
Okay.
It's also really weird that they do.
They're different parks.
Yeah, but like, if you ask most random people, I don't think anybody knows that they have different names. I think like both of those names are the same name for everybody.
Yeah, that's fair. And they have them in different countries too, and I feel like they're all Disneyland. I think it might have to do with, so I think Disney World refers to, because in Orlando, I don't know if it's the same in California, but they have like all the different parks. Like you have, yeah. And so then so Magic Kingdom is what like everybody refers to Disney World as. But then you have, like the animal one, and you have Epcot, which I don't remember if that's Disney or not, but like
it is.
You have Universal Studios. So like, I guess that's why that one's Disney World.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never known. No clue whatsoever. I went, most recent time I was in like I had like just turned 21, I think.
Oh, I probably haven't been since I was like 9.
Where's Roslyn at? He was probably there yesterday. He was in line behind him.
Him and Britt. Yeah, no, my grandparents lived in Florida until, actually, I don't know. My grandparents lived in Florida like 2 hours from Orlando. So when I was a kid, we would go like every summer, but then they moved to Arizona and I haven't been back.
Yeah, I don't know any of it. Anyway, let's get to game number 5. Another one that I don't really know how to talk about, although I am getting part of it. 4.1 run implied total for the Rangers, 4.4 for the Angels, Cole Reagans and Patrick Sandoval. Let's talk Patrick Sandoval here. 7,400 projected for 25% ownership. How you feeling about that? Price tag works. I don't know if I want 25%, but I think it looks okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like a desert price in that there's not a lot around him that you would want to pivot to. Like you have Mike Clevenger against the Cardinals. We've already talked about Austin Voth, who I think is a fine pivot, but certainly think Sandoval projects a little bit better. So I think that's one reason he's getting so much ownership. It's just like you're going to have some lineups where you can't get to one of the pitchers that are more expensive, and Sandoval just fits in there. He is a good pitcher. He's got about a 23.5% strikeout percentage, 3.67 xFIP. The matchup is okay. It's a solid Texas lineup, but there are some strikeouts there. One thing I do like for Sandoval is that 2 of the most dangerous hitters on Texas, Seager and Lowe, are both left-handed. And obviously they're good, and that's not by itself an issue. Sandoval has allowed like 1 extra base hit to lefties all season long. He has an actual ISO allowed to lefties of 0.09. His expected ISO is 0.77, 246 expected WOBA. Just been absolutely lights out as far as limiting production against lefties. So the fact that he probably can just sort of neutralize Seager and Lowe makes me like the spot a little bit better. And then he's been good against righties as well. 124 expected ISO, still a 23.5% strikeout percentage.
Is this a spot where you'd have any interest in the Rangers because of Sandoval's ownership?
Not really, just because there are just so many bad pitchers on this slate. I think it's going to be tough for me to get to a lot of teams facing good pitchers. I do think it's kind of interesting that the Rangers have an implied run total slightly north of 4. I expected that to be a little bit lower. So it kind of it sticks out to me as one of those spots where it's just like, it's 9:00 and the Rangers have 5 runs and you're like, yeah, I should have read into that a little bit more, but I kind of doubt that I'm going to get too much of them.
Do you have any interest in the Angels? 7th in top stacks, 7th in top value, 8th in ownership. This is a team I'm getting to. I think just for that combination of top stack, top value, they're in 12% of my lineups right now.
I like the Angels here. They've been running out better lineups recently. We've talked about it typically from a pitcher standpoint in that you don't get a million free strikeouts anymore. But whenever you have Trout and Ohtani in a lineup, it makes the stack at least somewhat appealing because you have 2 of your 5 spots or 2 of your 4 spots, depending on site, just locked up with 2 of the best hitters. Rengifo leading off with multi-position eligibility at 4,200. He's been hitting well. He's having a solid season since the start of last year against left-handed pitching. Never mind, I can't. Oh yeah, only 98 plate appearances, 149 expected ISO. Data's not coming through for him this year, so that's probably not factored in. But yeah, it's not my site that I'm looking at. But he's been playing well. He has multi-position eligibility. He's 4,200. You have Taylor Ward at 3,900 hitting cleanup, and you've got a solid matchup against Cole Ragans, who so far hasn't really shown the ability to pitch in the major leagues. 179 expected ISO to righties with a 15% strikeout percentage. The only lefty there's 2 lefties with Ohtani and Ford. But, Ohtani hits lefties really, really well. You're probably not really worrying about Mike Ford unless it's just a random 5th piece of a stack. I like Joe Adell hitting 7th as a GPP play as well, just because he has so much power and he's facing a pitcher that doesn't get a lot of swings and misses. So I'm with you. At the lack of ownership, I am actually interested in the Angels here.
Yeah, I ended up getting, almost 2x the field. They're making up a lot bigger chunk of my 5-man stacks as well. I think they're just in a good spot because Reagan stinks. That works for me.
Yep.
Don't really have anything else I need to add here. Do you have anything else you want to touch on from this game? Do you have any Rangers bats that you wanted to try to point out?
Josh Young, 2,300, one of the top hitting prospects. DraftKings just doing the thing again where they pretend that every minor leaguer sucks.
There we go.
One other completely unrelated thing I'd meant to mention earlier. I think it was Julio maybe with the super chat a while ago about NFL randomness.
Yeah.
Josh and I are on a 9 a.m. Sunday show. So he said he hadn't seen us on NFL shows.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point. I don't even think about the fact that we do that show because you and I have only done it once. And you and I aren't doing that show this Sunday either.
Oh, really?
No, I'm Laffy this Sunday, which I'm not going to, you can clip this audio. It's fine. I'm going to put it out there. I'm wildly unqualified to take Laffy's spot on an hour-and-a-half deeper dive NFL show, but I am. I can drive the car. I can get us from point A to point B. Not really bringing a lot of intricacy to that one.
No, I mean, you filling in for Laffy as a host is like you trying to fill in for me as an analyst.
Which sport?
Any of them.
You're out of your mind. Prize Picks.
Best player in general.
Oh, that stings. Prize Picks, everybody. Presenting sponsor of this show. Click the link in the description of the video. Head on over to Prize Picks, make a deposit. They will match that deposit with anything up to $100. So you put in $47.50, they'll match with $47.50. You put in $100, they'll match with $100. I'm going to give Adam a couple pitcher fantasy scores because here you're picking over-unders. You don't need an optimizer. You're trying to put together a parlay card. You hit 5, you'll net up to 10 extra entry fee. So we're going to start it off with, we'll go Charlie Morton, 39.5.
Under.
Yeah, I got 35.9, so no dice there. Patrick Sandoval. This will be an interesting talking point. 31.5. He's kind of in the middle of everything.
Yeah, we have him at 29.5, so I would lean under.
Yeah, same here. And then let's go one more. Who would be fun? They don't have a ton of them here today. We'll go hitters. We'll go find Mike Trout or Ohtani, one of the two. So remember, this is going to be DraftKings scoring now. Ohtani over under 7.5.
Over. We have him at 9.4. We have Trout at 11. That's kind of interesting to me that the gap is that big because Ohtani hits everything. But
I have Ohtani above Trout by 0.3 of a point.
That also seems crazy to me, but simply because it's lefty-lefty. But
does that matter? Not really.
Well, I mean, I think it matters enough when you're splitting hairs between Trout and Ohtani.
Well, Ohtani's only going to face him once. It'll be fine.
Yeah, that's true.
Either way, there's no going wrong by having either of those guys.
Agreed.
All right. White Sox and Guardians, 4.1 run implied total for the Sox, 3.2 for the Guardians. Dylan Cease and Aaron Savali. No ownership going to Savali. No real ownership going to Dylan Cease because he's 11K today in the worst strikeout matchup on the slate. What do you do with Dylan Cease today? Besides just sort of, I guess, ignore him is what I'm thinking. I have 9%.
He's a really interesting tournament play to me that I don't know if I'll actually be able to get to, but I like the idea of getting them because I think there's just going to be enough lineups you build where you don't have to sacrifice that much. He's $2,000 more expensive than Castillo and Morton. So he's clearly not quote unquote optimal in the sense that, like, I don't think you're playing Cease in cash. You're just giving away money basically for a lower projected guy. But I always find it interesting when you can pivot to the highest strikeout guy on the slate to save ownership. So it is a spot where I do kind of like the idea of paying up to be contrarian. I mentioned it before. If I'm doing that, I probably do it with Cease before I do it with Carrasco. You're just getting, it's a tough strikeout matchup, 16% strikeout percentage for Cleveland this year, but a guy with a 31% strikeout percentage getting very little ownership on a slate where pitching isn't great. You have a couple of really strong options, but it's not like you have, 8 guys in that range that all need to fail for Cease to get there. You kind of just need 2 to be mediocre. So I like the idea of getting to them. Getting to Cease, I don't know how much I'll actually get to in practice, just because, again, I typically differentiate more with bats than I do with pitching.
Yeah, it's just so hard to go all the way up to 11K today. That's a ridiculous price tag. I mean, like, it's ridiculous for this particular matchup. If the Guardians were a team that had like a 24% aggregate strikeout rate, that Cease could look so much more playable today, but he's getting the salary in like one of the worst possible spots he could get it. Anything for Savali?
No, he's 8,400, mediocre matchup. He's an okay enough pitcher. I just have a hard time really wanting to get to him.
Do you want to get to either one of the bats here?
Also not expecting him to go overly deep into this game, I don't think. I'm pulling it back up, but if I remember correctly from this morning, he went like 3 2/3 in his last rehab start. 2 2/3.
Okay. White Sox bats are 16th.
I'm not expecting Savali to go deep enough that I want to play him at 8,400.
Do you like either one of these stacks?
Not particularly. Cease obviously is really, really good. Savali's good enough. The White Sox are not all that appealing to me.
Glad I stopped that sip of water there. Yeah, the most I got of anybody here is either 3.3% of noted Hall of Famer Elvis Andrus or 3.3% of Yoan Moncada. Just a weird game. Like, Cease's price makes it too hard to go that direction, and then there's nothing else of interest in the rest of it. So we push on. Royals and Twins. 4.5 run implied total for the Royals, 4.7 for the Twins. Zach Greinke and Dylan Bundy. Interesting 2 dudes pitching against each other. Neither guy getting any ownership. Do you like Greinke or Bundy today?
Absolutely not.
No, nothing here?
Nothing. I mean, Bundy's not even really cheap. He's 7,600. He's striking out like 16% of hitters this year with a 4.6 xFIP. If you go to the FanGraphs probable pitchers page, you have to go to page 2 to find Zach Greinke if you sort by strikeout percentage. And he has a pretty difficult matchup against the Twins. Also looks like it's supposed to be like 90 degrees in Kansas City. So, it's typically a good pitcher's park, but should play a little bit smaller here as well.
Right. Dude, south of the border is such a sad thing to drive past at this point.
I haven't driven past it in probably since 2010.
I drove past it within the last year, at least once, maybe twice. I don't know, Charleston, Savannah. I don't know where I was going at the time, but it just looks like sadness from 95.
Yeah, actually, it was probably 2014. I think 2014 we went to some like random lake in South Carolina. But yeah, no, I used to like passing it just because it meant I was like an hour away from Coastal or whatever. But
there you go.
Yeah, haven't been to Myrtle Beach, I don't think, since like 2010.
You're not missing anything. I was there yesterday morning.
Myrtle Beach?
Yeah. Picked my parents up. They flew in.
Oh, okay.
So I was at Myrtle Beach and home like by the time you guys finished up one of your shows yesterday morning.
How far are you from Myrtle Beach?
An hour and a half.
No, that's not bad.
Right. And like the first half hour is just getting from one side of Wilmington to the other.
Right.
If I lived downtown, I could be there in an hour. Just I live in like this is the section of town you go to when you don't have any fun any longer.
Yeah, I mean that's Baltimore's sort of similar in that like there are parts of Baltimore you can be on the highway and out of the city in 5 minutes. I live in the one where it takes me 20 minutes just to get out of the city.
Yep. So like they recently built a bypass like that loops are obviously, you know what I mean when I say bypass, which is great, and like it cuts that down, but I'm still on the opposite side of anything I want to do if I'm trying to go towards South Carolina. But it's smooth ride instead of red lights straight down the center of it all.
Yeah, I do actually want to go to Myrtle Beach at some point just because I wasn't 21 when I went to Coastal.
Let me know. I can be there very quickly. Yeah. Let's talk Twins bats, I guess. They're the ones picking up the most ownership, but we're going to have to talk Royals as well. 4th in top stack, 2nd in top value, 2nd in ownership. This is not a team I'm getting to because of probably the value here on the Twins, but I clearly understand why they're getting rostered.
Yeah, there's a ton of value here. It's a good spot against Greinke. He's been reverse splits this year with respect to power as well, which I think is probably explained by the fact that he's had some success with his changeup to lefties that he doesn't throw to righties. 194 expected ISO to righties, only 122 to lefties. So I'm not saying that to say, don't play Arise or Gordon or Cave. They're all fine. But I am saying it because when the best hitters in this lineup, Correa, Miranda in particular, are right-handed, I'm certainly not shying away from them against Greinke. Urshela and Sanchez hitting 5th and 6th look pretty good as well. So I do think they should be getting ownership here. I think that there's a lot of ways you can use them, whether it's full stacking or just using them, as value to get to other teams that you want to get to. And then individually, ownership is kind of like Atlanta, not quite as much though. Gordon, Arise, Correa, Sanchez, Urshela, all 10 to 18% owned. Then you get a little bit of a drop to Miranda just because first base is a deep position. Jake Cave a little bit less than that. And then whoever Matt Wallner is, and Celestino getting no ownership.
I'm light on these guys just because, probably because I'm getting to like the Yankees and they're not getting ownership, and I would much rather do what I'm doing there than not that. What do you want to do with your Royals, though? 10th in top stack, 7th in value, 5th in ownership, sort of like a slightly worse version of the Twins stack?
Yeah, I expect that I'll get to them a good amount as well. It's the same thing that we see a lot with Kansas City, where if you just look at the top stacks tool, it seems like they're really overowned. But when you consider how useful they are in roster construction, I don't think they're actually that overowned. You have catcher outfield on Melendez. You have third base shortstop on Witt. You have another really high upside catcher in Perez. You have a really good first base option in Pasquantino, who's still only 2,700. Michael A. Taylor has been a slightly above average hitter this year for the first time in years. Michael Massey is cheap at a relatively weak position. You have Olivares back, which gives you a little bit of right-handed pop there as well. And Bundy's just not a great pitcher. He has done a good job limiting power this year, or a better job, I should say. 178 expected ISO to righties, 210 actual ISO. So he's gotten a little bit unlucky there. 145 expected ISO to lefties, but he's also not striking guys out like he used to. So I like both of these teams, even though they are popular. And to answer the question in chat about actual power or raw power versus game power, if you ever play baseball, just imagine like how much easier it is to hit in batting practice versus a game. Raw power is more like the power, like batting practice power, and game power is game power.
Yep. Boy George with the super chat. Would you stack as a main stack? Who would you stack as a main stack between Atlanta and New York, with Colorado as the secondary stack? It's New York for me, but I don't think there's a wrong answer, but it's New York for me.
Who would you stack as a main stack between? I don't think there's a wrong answer, but I would. Colorado's not very popular. I'd probably lean Atlanta.
Okay.
I think it actually probably for me depends on who from Colorado. Looking at their ownership, we haven't talked about them yet, but there's half the lineup not getting anything and half that's pretty popular. I think if I'm going with like the best Colorado players, I'd probably go with the Yankees. If I'm going with like the not as popular Colorado players, I'd go with the Braves.
All right. Now we get to cores. Rockies and Giants. 5.8 run implied total for the Rocks, 5.6 for the Giants. Kyle Freeland and John Brebbia or someone else. It's a bullpen game for the Giants today. And Kyle Freeland's getting no ownership. So let's start here. Would you rather have one of the Giants bullpen guys or Kyle Freeland today?
I guess Freeland, but neither.
Agreed. Let's talk bats. We'll start with the Giants, who are number 1 in top stack, number 1 in top value, number 1 in ownership, and number 1 in stack score. This is a spot that I'm going to get away from just because that feels like a lot of ownership. And I think we named a couple other spots I like more, but it shouldn't surprise anybody that they're the number 1 stack on paper. I just think they're overowned. Yeah,
I do. Again, kind of a little bit of concerns that we see that ownership come in, a little bit lower. We saw it yesterday. We've seen it a lot. And then also I do have more concerns about the Giants pinch hitting when they're facing a left-handed pitcher. You have Austin Slater in the lineup. You have JD Davis in the lineup. Brinson hitting 9th. I think there's a good chance that any or all of those guys do not finish this game out. Mike Yastrzemski is the only lefty in the lineup. He is interesting to me in tournaments. One, because Kyle Freeland's been awful against lefties this year. I don't really know the reason. It's not something that's been the case his whole career. But two, if Yastrzemski's starting, he's probably not getting pinch hit for later because at least according to Baseball Press, they don't even have a left-handed reliever in their bullpen. So lefty starting this game should mean a lefty finishing this game, but you do get some value here, which, pushes them up as well. It's another one where like I don't have any issue getting to the Giants, but it does start to become problematic when you have the Giants and then like you also have Morton and Castillo looking like clear top pitching options. I'm more likely typically to just get away from the bats and keep the pitching.
Which team are you expecting to get to here more, the Giants or the Rockies? Rockies second in top stack, lesser values, so they've finally been priced like they play in course, but they are fourth still in ownership. I'm finding it a lot easier to get to the Rockies and over the Giants. That should not surprise anybody that's watched this show for months.
Yeah, I'm there with you. Colorado's ownership has come up quite a bit, which I'm happy to see, because this morning it was that thing where, they're like 2x top stack versus ownership, and everything that we've seen this year means that they're going to be really popular. So their ownership coming up is good to see. Makes me feel a little bit better about just it being correct. But I do still like the spot. It's not ideal going up against a bullpen game, but you do still have reasonable pricing here. They're just not as cheap as the Giants, but you have Jonathan Daza for value hitting second if you need it. Michael Toglia hitting fifth looks really good at 3,500. McMahon leading off looks good at 4,800. Obviously, you can play some Crone and some Blackman and Grichuk. Those guys are all fine. And then I mentioned it a second ago when we were answering that super chat, but Ryan McMahon leading the way with about 20% ownership here. That makes a ton of sense to me with multi-position eligibility. Daza's at 13% for the value. Toglia has value and MPE. Diaz is at 11%. But then you get Grichuk at 8%, Blackman at 6%, Crone at 6%, Montero at 5%, Trejo at 2%. Those guys all have plenty of upside as well and just aren't getting nearly as much ownership. So from a stack perspective, when you're looking at it on an individual basis, I think the Rockies end up looking pretty good.
At least we're on the same page there. EMAC with a question that actually has an answer. How is Adam at 2x speed today, but Josh is normal? Is this a new premium feature on YouTube? One of us is drinking straight black cold brew at 5:48 p.m. and the other one's on painkillers.
Yeah, one of us is on painkillers. One of us worked out and then got a cold brew and then got on the show. So that combined with, I think I normally am on 2x speed anyway.
Yeah. The only thing that's happened to me so far today, other than not having food and drink, I was put under for a tooth removal, and I've eaten a painkiller before this show started, while Adam is just drinking straight caffeine. So yeah, that's he literally is at 2x in comparison to me. I'm probably more at like 1 point or at like 0.75, where you're at like 1.5, but because I don't think that I'm at normal either.
I just wanted to use that as a reason to point out that I worked out today, because normally you're the one just dropping that you were at the gym at 1 p.m. or whatever.
That was yesterday, right when I got back from Myrtle Beach. And it sucked. That's tomorrow then, too. All righty. Do we have anything else that we need to add here? I assume the large majority of a cash lineup is going to get made up with some of these Giants and potentially some of the Rockies.
Yeah, I would think so. When I built my dummy cash lineup earlier, it was sort of by hand. Like I just kind of ran Fantasy Cruncher and then just replaced what I thought would change and didn't agree with. And I had, I don't know, four Giants in it. I think Toglia probably ends up in there now that his lineup spot bumped up. But yeah, like Slater hitting leadoff, it's in cash. It's kind of just like, what do you do? He's 3,500. He's leading off in cores. He's probably going to lose a plate appearance, but he's still cheap. Same goes with JD Davis. So I think you're at the very least playing a lot of cores in cash.
MLBDD. One big word, even though I realize that's just 5 letters. That is the promo code you've got for this show. If you would like to get 50% off your first week of Stokastic Plus, all you have to do is click the link in the description of the video to activate this offer, or you could just go to our signups page and use that promo code to get 50% off your first week of any weekly package. If you only want MLB, that's totally okay. You can just go to the MLB weekly package, but you can use this. Any new user can use this promo code. Fantasy Cruncher, not included in this promo. It is an add-on. You can get that at checkout, but otherwise, use that promo code. Get yourself a week. It's going to cover projections and ownership and lineup builders, Discord, and more. It's on the screen, guys. MLBDD. A's and Mariners. So Eric Johnson's about to keep his hands under the desk. 2.7 run implied total for the A's, 4.1 for the Mariners, Luis Castillo and JP Sears. Sears unowned at 6,600. Castillo slightly owned, 62% at 9,100. Is this right? Is he too owned, or is this just the very, very obvious thing to do at 9,100? Or is it both?
It's both. He's too popular in that he's not going to be a top 2 scoring pitcher 60% of the time. We have him at about 30%, but he's also a top 2 value pitcher 17% of the time. And then the thing you also have to keep in mind, and this kind of goes back to the uniques conversation we were having before, you're not building the optimal lineup in baseball. You're just trying to come close to it. So when Castillo's the 3rd best pitcher or the 4th best pitcher, you can still build a winning lineup with him because it's very unlikely that any of your opponents have the actual optimal lineup. So it just becomes a really high probability play, and it's only taking up 1 spot in your lineup. So it's still just very easy to play other guys. That's not to say like you have to play Castillo, because 60% is a lot of ownership. If Castillo goes out there and scores 12 points and you don't have him, obviously you're in a really good spot to just be passing a lot of the field. It's just that when you start weighting the likelihood of your lineup having success and then also the ownership, I still just think Castillo ends up being in a lot of those lineups. So we kind of talked about it with Morton too. For me personally, I expect that I end up getting a lot of Castillo and a lot of Morton and just playing some lower owned hitters. That's typically the approach that I take on slates like this. Yeah. If you see that I played a lot of Giants, then either I'm not going to have a lot of Castillo or something in my spreadsheet broke and I played some really bad lineups. So I think it's just kind of
been there too.
There. What'd you say?
Remember when you had everybody's like lineup order changed by 2 spots?
Yep. I don't remember who on the Angels I projected like Shohei Ohtani, but it certainly was not Shohei Ohtani. It was some like random 9 hitter. But yeah, so that's kind of what it is across all of, you're just trying to balance out ownership. And typically it's going to be easier to get a similarly projected lineup at lower ownership by getting away from popular bats than it is on a slate like this, getting away from Castillo. That's why I think I still just end up playing a lot of Castillo. But at the same time, it's pretty clear he's over-owned just in the sense of ownership versus chances of success.
Do you have any interest in Sears?
No. Tough. I mean, it's a good park, but tough matchup. Not great strikeout stuff from him so far. Pretty sure he's on the same page with Zach Greinke on FanGraphs. Against righties this year, he's given up some expected power as well. 15% strikeout percentage, 193 actual ISO, 206 expected ISO. The only thing really I think working in his favor is the park. But I think at current ownership, I would rather just go to Austin Voth if I'm going in that price range.
Do you have any interest in the Mariners bats? Because I'm quite confident we're not talking about the A's.
Yeah, I don't have interest in the A's. I have slight interest in Seattle just because Sears has given up that power to righties. They're only getting about 4% ownership, but this is still a really difficult park to hit in. So yeah, I mean, they're fine. Julio Rodriguez also is day to day, so he will also influence how interested I am. Like if you're not getting Julio Rodriguez, obviously the lineup becomes cheaper, but also just becomes a lot less appealing. If Rodriguez is in there and you have Haniger, Rodriguez, France all hitting towards the top of that order, that's some serious right-handed power that you can start out with.
Padres and Cardinals. Coin flip game, 4 runs on both sides. Mike Clevinger and Adam Wainwright. Neither guy's really getting any ownership. Wainwright, you got to pay for at 9,400. Clevinger, you don't at 7,300. Are you paying for either one of these guys?
Probably not. Wainwright's been the better pitcher in terms of run prevention this year and really hasn't even been that far off in strikeout percentage, which is wild considering we're talking about Mike Clevinger. But, you're paying more for him than for Morton or Castillo. You're paying more for him than for Sandoval. It's somebody where, again, I guess if you're stacking the Giants, if you were doing something like, I don't know, Giants plus Braves, then maybe you go to Wainwright and just say, okay, cool. Hopefully he beats those 2 pitchers. And that's where I'm going to be contrarian. I doubt I get to too much of that though. Not a good strikeout matchup against the Padres. Difficult, run prevention matchup as well. So in that context, I guess, it makes some sense. Like there's no way Wainwright's a 50-1 dog to Morton or a 60-1 dog to Castillo. But outside of very specific lineups, I don't really see a reason to get there. On the Clevinger side, he's got a tough matchup against the Cardinals too. The price tag's certainly more reasonable. You have Sandoval pulling pretty much all of the ownership in that price range at 27%. Clevinger's at 6%. But he really just hasn't been good this year. Only striking out 20% of hitters, 4.77 xFIP. Tough matchup against the Cardinals. It's difficult to get there with any level of confidence, I think.
Are you getting to any of the bats? 16th and 12th in top stack, 13th and 19th in ownership. Just doesn't appear to have much offense coming here for a game that's good. I think it's just like a tough spot because of the pitching.
Yeah, they're kind of like the Mets to me, where in theory, I like it because they're just two high upside offenses that aren't getting much ownership. Wainwright's a solid pitcher. Clevenger hasn't been that great this year. But the issue that I think you really run into is the Cardinals are pretty cheap, except for Edman, Goldschmidt, Arenado. But those are guys, especially Goldschmidt and Arenado, that you certainly want in your stack. And then on the Padres side, they're just pretty expensive, the guys that you would want, particularly Soto, Machado, Drury, in the middle of that order. So not only are you getting a team in a tough park to hit in where it's like 68 or 70 degrees or something like that, you're also going to lose out on some of what you can build around them as far as secondary stacks go. So I think that's like, I like the idea of just getting these teams at no ownership because they're good, but I don't think I actually end up really being able to do it, all things considered.
And then we close it out. Dodgers and Diamondbacks, 5.2 run implied total for the Dodgers, 3.1 for the Diamondbacks. Tyler Anderson and Dry Jameson going in this one. 8,600 for Anderson, 6,100 for Jameson. I would have liked to take a shot on Jameson, but take a shot of Jameson, but not here against the Dodgers. He's unowned. Tyler Anderson is 8% owned at 8,600. Seems about right. Maybe a little light, but it's just sort of because everybody else, like there's only 4 guys getting ownership.
Yeah, I mean, the Diamondbacks have like a 2.8 implied run total. Anderson is a decent enough pitcher, 18% strikeout percentage, 4.3 xFIP. One thing working against him is that he pitches for the Dodgers, so you're probably talking about like 85 pitches and coming out of the game, which certainly can be fine at that price point, but he doesn't have great strikeout stuff. It's not a great strikeout matchup. To me, he's just more of like filler where I have popular bats and don't want to go with Castillo and Morton together. Then Anderson becomes fine. On the other side with Jameson, I doubt that I really get there. His price tag jumped from 4K to 6,100. He's got a really difficult matchup against the Dodgers. I will say that from a talent standpoint, there's not a lot to pay down. We've talked about Austin Voth at 6,700. I would rather go there against the Tigers. But after that, I mean, if for whatever reason in a given lineup my choices are Jameson here, or Corbin against the Braves, or Sears against the Mariners, or Freeland or whatever, then I guess you just go to Jameson and hope that you can bank on the talent. But I doubt that I'm really going to end up having to do that.
Dodgers bats are 6th and 6th. Is this a place you want to try to pay up?
I think they look fine. The ownership is about where it should be. 7% chance of being the top stack, 6% projected ownership. They do kind of stand out when you look at the top stack tool, though, because they are the first team that isn't getting double-digit aggregate ownership. Not that that's a huge issue that some of those teams are, especially when it's spread out individually, like we had talked about. But you're getting a pitcher in Jameson who's making his second major league start. He was very good in his first one. He didn't put up very good numbers at AAA this year, but that can mostly be written off by pitching at Reno. I think he's going to be solid, but you're still just talking about a guy facing an all-star lineup in his second major league start. So there is a lot of upside for the Dodgers.
Is there any upside for the Diamondbacks against Tyler Anderson?
I have a tough time really wanting to get there, especially in this park. Christian Walker at 4,500 against the lefty makes some sense. Stone Garrett, if he's leading off at 2,500, Ketel Marte at 4,200. Those guys are okay, but Anderson's a pretty solid pitcher in terms of run prevention. 107, that's Michael Grove, not Tyler Anderson. I think Anderson's at like 120 something against right-handed pitching this year. Can't get it pulled up right now. Oh, there it goes. 135 expected ISO to righties, 288 expected WOBA. Just not somebody I'm really looking to target against here.
Let's sum it up. Favorite pitchers. That should be easy.
Yeah, Castillo, Morton, Sandoval if you need a discount.
Favorite stacks.
Colorado, Atlanta, Yankees.
There we go, everybody. Deeper dive in the books. MLB Live Before Lock coming up next, taking you all the way up until 7:05. Thank you to Prize Picks for sponsoring this one. If you want to sign up at our site, though, use the promo code MLBDD. That's all we got. We are out of here. Stay on this stream. MLB Live Before Lock coming up right now.
What is going on, everybody? It's time for another Stokastic MLB Live Before Lock show. I am once again here joined by T. McBee, Terry McBride. We're going to be breaking down this 11-game baseball slate. We've got pitchers to talk about. We've got a Coors Field game to talk about, and then also a Coors Field game that is a little bit of weird pricing because Carlos Rodon was expected to start for the Giants. Carlos Rodon no longer starting for the Giants. Today, we are sponsored by Prize Picks. If you haven't signed up at Prize Picks yet, you could do so using the promo code Awesemo, or you could click on the link below in the description box. And when you sign up over a Prize Picks for the first time, you're going to get $100 added on to your initial deposit. Terry, what's going on today?
Not too much, buddy. I did the morning show with Adam this morning. I hosted that one and got to talk through the slate early. And then we've just kind of been really lazy and watching a whole hell of a lot of Law and Order SVU all day today. That's been the sum total of my afternoon. And then just spent the last hour or so watching that show, watching the deeper dive and trying to set some lineups here. So it's been a really productive day. What about you?
That's like the oldest thing anybody's ever told me to do. You watched you watched Law and Order SVU.
I also
all day?
take a nap.
How am I? You're a 6-year-old housewife.
I'm officially old. Yeah,
but why?
I don't really know. I was in the house. It was on TV. The remote was like over there. I was laying on the couch and just kind of stayed on. It's on right now. The TV over here has it still on. I had to mute it.
I guess this is what happens when you bank when you start banking.
I'm not going to find out what happens in this case because I have to do this show now. I mean, that's really what this story is about.
Yes, you win a little bit of money in DFS, Terry. You have your biggest win ever, and then all of a sudden it's like, you know what I'm doing? I'm pivoting my life. I'm becoming a Law and Order SVU guy. That's what I'm getting really into. We got this baseball slate to talk about as well, and what do you make of this slate, just in terms of how you're going to be approaching it from 11 games? And we're going to be talking more about our favorite pitchers, favorite stacks, but what are the things that you're looking at the most on this slate from just an overarching picture, if anything?
I think it's a slate that offers some really interesting options in terms of very low owned quality pitching that looks a lot like the very popular good pitching outside of like Luis Castillo at the top of the board going up against the A's. I see a lot of these spots as pretty equal. So I'm happy to just play the tournament ownership that the field is offering me and go to some spots like a Carlos Carrasco, I think is just dramatically underowned on FanDuel. So that's a spot I'm excited about. And I think you can do the same thing with bats. Adam was just talking at the end of the show about the Rockies being one of his top stacks. We talked about them this morning. And I just think for a team that's also playing in Coors Field, they're under-owned on both sides. So some interesting angles to approach this slate from both on the mound and at the plate.
So let's start by talking about the chalk pitching that you just mentioned. And the player we should start with is Luis Castillo, because like you said, he's the most popular pitcher on the slate by a mile on FanDuel. He's very popular on DraftKings as well, though more hand-in-hand with Charlie Morton as the 1A, 1B top most popular pitchers of the slate for DK purposes. But starting with FanDuel here, we've got Castillo, 43% owned, over on DraftKings, 62% projected ownership for Luis Castillo. That's a lot of ownership going to him on an 11-game slate. What are you going to be doing with Castillo, who's a very talented pitcher? He's underpriced on both sides. I don't know how they came up with this price for him, but $9,100 on DK, $9,700 on FanDuel isn't enough for Luis Castillo against the Oakland A's. But how are you going to weigh the price, the expected production, and the ownership of him in large field tournaments?
Yeah, I mean, that would be cheap for him against like the Astros or somebody like against a really good team, let alone against the Athletics. That is a broken price. He should be easily 1,000 more, if not like 1,500 more in this spot because the A's are just so flat bad. He's one of the more talented pitchers on this slate. Oh, this is still coming up with the there's so many multi-named guys on this slate specifically today. And he was one of the ones I forgot to change out in my stat board. I'm getting the wrong Luis Castillo numbers, but he's one of the higher strikeout rate performers on this slate. One of the more reliable pitchers, 27.4% strikeout rate this year, 7.1% walks, sitting at a 3.26 expected ERA. Nothing not to like about Luis Castillo. We know there's major upside for him going up against an A's team that is, I mean, the dregs of the league, a 130 team ISO against righties, 23.7% strikeout rate, 11% worse than average creating runs, 2.34% home run rate. All those numbers are 25th or worse in out of the 30 teams in the league. So definitely a spot to fire up and target. It just depends where you want to be relative to the field. With some of these other spots, like I mentioned coming into the show, drawing my eye at least for being low owned, I'll probably be below the field on Castillo, but I definitely want to have a whole hell of a lot of them. It's a great spot.
Yeah, I think For starters, let's say this, cash games. You guys are playing Luis Castillo,
Oh, God.
right? FanDuel, he's your go-to guy on a single pitcher site. On DraftKings, your pitching combination is Luis Castillo and Charlie Morton for cash games. They're the two best options on a slate on a points per dollar basis. The only thing that we're going to have to quibble with in large field tournaments is what percentage of him we want to get to. So where he's right around 60% on DK, right around, over 40%, was it 42.5% over on FanDuel. But what's the number you would feel comfortable playing him in large field tournaments?
So if he's going 42 and change on FanDuel, there are a handful of pitchers that I want to get to on this slate. So probably 20-ish, 25-ish, but I tend to undercut some of those dramatically high pitching numbers pretty aggressively so that I can spread out. I don't go too much beyond 25 unless we've got one of those situations where it's DeGrom against the Pirates, Verlander against the Athletics, and nobody else really to go to. Then I'll let it get out to the 50s and 60s and whatnot. But yeah, this spot with other options to play, I'm happy having 25%. If it gets to 30 in my sort, I'm fine with that. And I expect it'll be a spot because of how he's projecting for me, where I have to manually trim that. It'll probably organically come up something around where the field's at.
So now let's talk about the other chalk pitching option on this slate. That is Charlie Morton, who's also crazy popular on FanDuel at 25.7%, DraftKings north of 52% ownership. So at least per our current ownership, we are going to have Charlie Morton and Luis Castillo on DraftKings making up for about 104% of the pitcher ownership. So there just is not very much wiggle room for other guys to pick up all that much popularity. There's a couple other players on DK, Nestor Cortes, Patrick Sandoval with ownership in the mid-20s. But this is a slate where the ownership is so concentrated a pitcher that if you're doing anything outside of playing Castillo and Morton, you got a fairly contrarian looking lineup. So let's break down the other chalk pitcher here. Charlie Morton, who was a great matchup against the Washington Nationals, and also a lot of strikeout upside for Charlie Morton because that's what he is. He's not as good of a real life pitcher as some of the other top pitchers, but for fantasy purposes, he generates so many strikeouts that he always ends up being a top tier DFS option. So how does Charlie Morton look as a chalk play for you today?
Yeah, definitely like a solid option as well. He's arguably underpriced as well against a flat team in the Nationals here, coming in at 9,000 on the DK slate, pulling 50% ownership, 9,200 on FanDuel, and equally popular. So I do think it's a spot you can go to as pretty much as aggressively as that Castillo spot. This is the second best matchup on the board, I think, in terms of the pitcher's strikeout acumen and strikeout upside. Nestor Cortes is also in a great spot against the Pittsburgh Pirates. I just don't put him at the same level, even though he has performed in spots at that level of being able to find strikeouts. I don't put him quite there. So I think this is the second best spot of the day. It's just, again, how much do you want to walk hand in hand with the field? How much do you want to get different? If you make any other decisions, like you're saying at pitcher, then you can immediately go to some of the chalky bats. You can go to the Atlantas, you can go to the Giants and not really worry all that much about your ownership. Just maybe make one unique decision in your hitter combinations, and you're off and running with a unique lineup. So I really like both of these options. I would be below the field on both of these options just because of that, though. There are other spots to spread out to that are very underowned.
Yeah, and that's how I feel as well. If I was building out, 150 lineups at this current ownership, Morton and Castillo are going to end up being my two most rostered pitchers. It doesn't mean on DraftKings I'm getting to north of 60 and 50% of them respectively. It's just really high numbers, and it's hard to get overweight to them. It's an 11-game slate. Like unless I'm building lineups and it's, hey, I have 70% Luis Castillo or 75% Castillo and 60% Charlie Morton, I'm underweight to the field on them. So I do find those numbers to be hard to be overweight to, just considering how high the ownership is projected to be. So I have to ask you now, Terry, if both you and I, we think Castillo and Morton are good plays. They're guys that we definitely think everybody should be playing in cash games and tournaments, though, maybe undercutting the ownership a little bit. What is your favorite pivot option on the high end away from Morton and Castillo?
So there's a lot of different ways we can go with that, right? Dylan Cease is a great option just based on who he is, his general pedigree. The price is very high, and he's in a tough matchup that doesn't yield a ton of strikeouts going against the Guardians, but he's arguably the best pitcher on this slate in terms of just raw talent. So there's definitely a good reason to consider him. He's going 7.8% owned on DK because he's pricey, 10.6 on FanDuel, 5% owned. The guy that really, I mentioned him twice already, and he just leapt out to me this morning, is Carlos Carrasco going for the Mets against the Brewers, 10.4 on DK, 0.5% owned. And then the real story on FanDuel, 9,100, 0.5% owned. That just seems like an excellent spot. It's not the biggest pushover kind of a lineup. The Brewers are decent. They're decent to good, I would say, but there's strikeouts in that lineup. He's a good enough strikeout pitcher that, you know, it's easy to get beyond the field, and it's easy to picture him coming in. We don't have a Jake DeGrom necessarily on this slate. Luis Castillo is arguably, you know, at that level. Cease, like I said, in that tough matchup. Carrasco's looking really, really good to me with his just total lack of ownership.
Yeah, I think that is sensible. Carrasco, like you said, projected for very minimal ownership on both sides. 0.5% on DK. It's also really expensive on DraftKings. FanDuel, 0.6% projected ownership. So DK at 10,500 or 10,400. I mean, it's a little more than I typically want to pay for Carrasco. But if you guys are building a bunch of lineups, as I don't know if you could hear, but there's police cars and stuff going by me out here. So the ownership on Carrasco, it's so low. There's a point where it makes sense. We have him projected with a 10.1% chance to be a top 2 scoring pitcher on the slate with only 0.5% projected ownership. I don't think if you're playing Carrasco, you could play Castillo or Morton with him, right? Because at that point, if you're playing Carrasco, you could play all the chalk with Carrasco, to what your point was before. Right, you're playing Carrasco, you play Luis Castillo, and then you build out a Braves, a Giants stack, whatever it might be. You got a different looking lineup. So that's what the utility is with Carlos Carrasco if you want to play all the rest of the chalk. For me, one that I like pivoting to, particularly in single entry tournaments, is Nestor Cortes, because I don't think his odds of success are that much different than Castillo's or Morton's. He doesn't have quite the same upside. He's a little bit more expensive, but I think something else to consider, particularly for somebody who's playing single entry, 3 entry max, the ownership on Castillo and Morton is going to be even more amplified, particularly on DraftKings. So we're seeing Castillo north of 60% ownership, Morton north of 50. Don't be surprised in single entry if that means that Castillo is 80% and Morton 70%, which then also means somebody like a Nestor Cortes probably comes in at like 10-ish% ownership or something like that. So he's somebody in large field tournaments I think is a viable pivot. We have the ownership being worthwhile in the mid 20% range, but also he's got a great matchup against the Pittsburgh Pirates. And like I said, in some smaller field tournaments or single entry stuff, Cortes is going to be really low owned. So I like the spot for him. He's somebody who I kind of stopped playing for a really long time because if you remember at the start of the year, he was ridiculous. I never really quite bought into Nestor Cortes, so I kept fading him. It was killing me. And then eventually it started working when he was really popular. The one was, I think there was a start against the Tampa Bay Rays where he was like 50-something% owned and he just got his ass kicked. And it was kind of downhill since then. But he's pitched better as of late. The ownership isn't there in the same way it was earlier in the season. I like the spot against the Pirates. What do you make of Nestor Cortes and all his weird trickery?
So the one that I love watching him pitch. I am with you, and we talked about it at the beginning of the season when he was doing it, and we've talked about it since, but I never fully bought into any of it being real, but I do really enjoy watching the guy pitch. He's just fun with the way that he works and just throws from different angles and uses trickery and guile to get through the game. It's a fantastic spot, 26.3% strikeout rate, 29th in baseball for the Pittsburgh Pirates against lefties this year, and not showing the offensive friskiness really, 92 WRC plus. They do have a 3.46% home run rate. They do find a little bit of home run power against lefties, but it's nothing that he can't handle. My one concern about him, and Adam and I talked about it this morning, is the pitch count. He's made 2 starts since coming off the IL, and he had very limited pitch counts. In my memory, when I was watching that last game, he came out for the 6th inning, and then Boone hooked him because he put 1 or 2 guys on base without getting anybody out. So I think that there's enough depth, especially against this lineup, that he could find you a good enough score. So I'm not shying away from Nestor, but that would be the one thing. If we get beat on that play, it's because he came out and only threw 75, 80 pitches and didn't quite get there. Maybe Michael Chavis hit a home run against him and knock a couple points off your score, and he just disappoints that way. Everything else about the spot I really, really like.
Yeah, and then once again, to me, it's a stronger small field play, just where I think that people are really going to gravitate towards the chalk. But still, I think that Cortes is a good guy to get to. The other one that's
he's only 8% owned on FanDuel too. Just to throw that into the mix. So I mean, he's low owned on FanDuel.
Yeah, really low on FanDuel there, like you said, and also fairly safe to pick up the win bonus, where that's even more important on FanDuel than it is on DK. Yankees at home against the Pirates. Yankees going to win that game more often than not.
Like that spot for the win, and certainly we'll I'm sure talk about the Yankees stacking a little bit, getting a little bit healthy, getting Harrison Bader into the lineup, Anthony Rizzo coming back, so it's a good spot for the Yankees offense. The one concern would be maybe the depth of start as far as chasing the quality start on FanDuel, but yeah, I love him for the win bonus at least here.
All right, we've got a super chat here from Anthony Fiala. He wants to know who's your single entry lineup stack tonight. And are you considering Cease? So yes, I am considering Cease. I have 3 pitchers that I'm weighing for single entry tonight on DraftKings. It is going to likely be some combination of Dylan Cease, Nestor Cortez, and Patrick Sandoval. I think those are the best plays for single entry relative to what I think the ownership is going to be. In terms of offense I'm going to play, I'm leaning towards the Rockies right now. I just really like the spot against the Giants. When Carlos Rodon was expected to pitch, the pricing is a little bit off for the Rockies, which, I mean, DraftKings has been fucking up the Coors Field pricing for I don't even know how long now. Also, for whatever reason, whenever the Giants play at Coors Field, they're always like, screw the park factors. We've seen that from DraftKings basically every time the Giants have played at Coors Field this year. But yeah, that's what I'm leaning towards right now. The Rockies, Cease is a possibility. Rockies are definitely going to be the stack, by the way. There's no doubt about that. And then unless we are to find their ownership like triple or doubles or something by the time we get closer to lock. But right now, 9% projected ownership, 11.5% top stack odds. That's the team I'm looking at in single entry. And then pitcher, I have a few builds in front of me, not exactly sure, but it's going to be some combination of Cease, Sandoval, and Nestor Cortez. So that's the other pitcher I want to ask you about. I know you mentioned him in passing before, Terry, but Sandoval in particular on DK, where he's only 7,400 against the Rangers, I think he's the best value play on the slate. Does that seem reasonable to you from a pitcher standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a spot I would be looking at very aggressively on the DK slate. On FanDuel, he's 9,000. He's kind of in that Nestor Cortez mix where at 9,500, Nestor was pulling 8% ownership. At 9,000, Sandoval's pulling 7.5%. So they're very similar on this slate. I think you can go to either one of them on the FanDuel slate in moderation without getting too crazy about it. And it's just a matter of how many shares you want to pull from Castillo and from Charlie Morton and throw to these guys. But he is in that mix for me over there. But he's super interesting at 7,400. I would say that 28.4% ownership. I don't have our probability of success mark for him being a top 2, but that just feels light given his talent and that price. 23.6% strikeout rate this year, 3.67 xFIP, a 13.1% induced swinging strike rate, only yields a 1.41% home run rate, a 33.8% hard hit. So he's very good at keeping the ball in the yard, doesn't give up bad contact, doesn't get himself in that much trouble. So I like Sandoval a lot here.
Yeah, so Sandoval, as far as cheap pitching options go, it's kind of hard to find cheap pitchers I really love today, but he's one that makes sense. So I want to ask you more about the FanDuel slate and the cheap pitchers, Terry. Are you playing any cheap pitchers at all on FanDuel? And if so, is there anybody you're gravitating towards?
No, it doesn't really look like it. I'll have some shares, as long as we're not considering the $9,000, $9,100 guys cheap. Probably Adam Wainwright is my bottom at 8,800. Tyler Anderson at 89. I might have a couple shares of, but I don't think we need to go to Aaron Savali against the White Sox. And nobody else really appeals to me that much. Patrick Corbin in spots has been somewhat useful this year, but I don't like this spot at all for him to do that. None of these other guys really appeal to me. Oh, I forgot. I'm sorry. Austin Voth. There it is.
I was about to bring
down
up
bottom because I was sorted by price, not by projection. So right. Austin Voth down the bottom of the board there projects out nicely for me against the Detroit Tigers, provided that we get 5 and change innings out of them. So I do like that spot.
I didn't watch the deeper dive before this, but I know Adam was on it. I have a very strong inclination without having listened to talk, because you do a lot of shows with people, you kind of know where their leans are and stuff. I would bet anything that if I looked at the ownership of Adam's lineups, Austin Voth, that's somebody who's going to be overweight to the field on. So the Orioles have done a really good job with them. And this is now one of the sharpest teams in all of baseball, which is crazy to think, because you remember 10 years ago, the Orioles pitching philosophy was whatever our minor leaguers, our top prospect, whatever their best pitches, we're not going to let them throw it anymore. Like that was their go-to thing. It's like, that was how they're going to get them to develop other pitches.
Right.
And that was a disaster. But Austin Voth, they've done things with him to make him more viable pitcher, which, by the way, he's never been remotely viable at any other point in his career. And he's older now. He's 30 years old. And they've made him into something that's kind of relevant this year. And he's very cheap today. He's a really good matchup. Look at his numbers this year. 4.36 ERA, 4.36 expected ERA. So identical numbers there, no luck involved. And then his strikeout rate this year is 20.5%. So I'm not going to claim that he's an ace or anything like that, but this is a viable big league pitcher who's pitching against the Detroit Tigers. And we know what to do with right-hand pitchers against the Detroit Tigers. Voth is $5,800 on FanDuel with almost no ownership. Voth on DraftKings, $6,700, also almost no ownership. If we're going contrarian as a spend down option on DK, I like getting to Austin Voth for FanDuel purposes. To what we were saying before, it's hard to find cheap guys to play And I think Voth is the one that stands out the most.
Yeah, and 2.8% ownership. I mean, it's not for that cheap a price at 5,800. That's a very expensive star hitter price almost on FanDuel. So you're getting a very cheap option on the single pitcher site that's only pulling 3% ownership. You have to like that for tournaments. It depends on how many shares. Again, you want to draw from the Castillos, the Mortons, the much more likely guys to put up a ceiling score. But if those guys fall short, and again, we're not talking about Jake DeGrom here against a Pittsburgh Pirates level team in a lot of cases. So there's a path for Voth to put up a serviceable score here, and that's all he needs to do at that price and at that popularity. So I do like that as a contrarian value spot, and I think it's playable on both sides. 67 on DK works as well.
Yeah, that's how I see it, because Austin Voth, it's a couple of things. First, the matchup, incredible. The price, great. Pitching better than people expect, and then just the ownership isn't there. So I want to open up now. Are there any guys that we've not yet talked about that make sense to you from a large field tournament perspective? Because we've hit on a lot of the popular pitchers, a couple contrarian options, but any loose ends that we've missed here that you want to tie up?
I think Tyler Anderson is somewhat playable if you want to go there, but I don't really see the need to go there against Arizona. He's just kind of a middling option on this slate. He's at a mid-level price, but I did mention him as like one of the bottom couple salaries that I would go to on FanDuel. At 86 on DK, maybe he's a little bit more interesting in just throwing that bag of mixed pitchers that you pull out as SP2 options and rotate through. So he'd maybe be on the board, but it's not my favorite spot by any means. I also mentioned Waino, not a lot of strikeout upside there. What you're hoping for with Waino is you get one of those 7-8 inning Waino starts where he books the win, books the complete game, books the quality start bonus, maybe finds a couple extra strikeouts on some of these Padres. But it's a low strikeout Padres lineup, 17.6% in the confirmed lineup here as a strikeout rate. So there's not a ton of upside in going to the Waino option. Even I'll only have a couple shares of it. Outside of that, we talked through the premium options. We talked through Carrasco, Sandoval. I don't really, would you have any shares of Aaron Savali here going up against the White Sox? He's like right in the middle of the board for me. I just don't see the need to get there.
Yeah, so not him. There is one guy that I'm kind of interested by, and I'm going to give the reasoning for it. Because at first glance, we're going to say we don't want anything to do with pitchers going up against the Los Angeles Dodgers. I'm a big believer of Dre Jameson. I don't know if you watched his last start against the Padres, his major league debut. He already looks like a stud. And I know the matchup against the Dodgers, it's a terrible matchup, right? It's something we don't usually want anything to do with. But this is the second part of a doubleheader for the Dodgers. They have absolutely nothing to play for. I'm taking a little bit of a leap of faith here and assuming that they're going to play a watered-down version of the lineup. And I don't know what happened, but I think Trey Turner just got hurt. So I'm going to assume that... What's that?
I had missed that.
So it's a doubleheader. So so they're playing right now. Trey Turner got lifted in a close game in the early part. There's no news on it, but maybe it's because it's a doubleheader. But I think it's potentially he's injured. This could be a really light version of the Dodgers lineup, kind of like after they clinch the division. If that's going to be the case for this being the tail end of a doubleheader, number one, I think the Diamondbacks would kind of be worth considering as a really long plus money bet with Dre Jameson on the mound. And Jameson also just at no ownership in large field tournaments. It's solely based on what the Dodgers lineup looks like, because I'm not going to play him at all if this is the fully loaded version of the Dodgers lineup. But just considering the circumstance here, doubleheader, they've got, like I said, Trey Turner lifted early in the first game. It seems like there's at least a possibility that I could squint my eyes and see upside in Jameson.
Yeah, I don't disagree that there's upside there. I hate the idea of tangling with the Dodgers lineup, but you're right. We could get a diminished version of it, particularly if Turner's banged up and they want to give him rest, or if he's actually legit hurt. So depending on what's in that Dodgers lineup, you could find some upside. The thing about it is you do have that Austin Voth option on the board here. So 5,500, it's similar prices on both sites. Jameson's a little bit cheaper, but he's probably going to be going up against a tougher matchup. So I don't love it, but I do see your angle there. And it was one that Adam and I talked through a little bit this morning. So yeah, I do think there's playability on the board. I just don't know that I'll be getting there.
Yeah. And by the way, because people in chat have informed me here. So what happened with Trey Turner is apparently he got hit in the back on a throw from Miguel Vargas. So at some point there was a ball hit, there was a play, he's running. I would be very surprised if he plays in the tail end of back-to-back after that happened. There's just there's no need for it.
Yeah,
the Dodgers
probably not actually hurt, but probably keep him out of tonight's game precautionary. Makes sense.
Dodgers are 102 and 44 They've already clinched the division, up 21 and a half games over the Padres. As far as best record in the NL, they are up. Let's see, what are they up? Like 10 games on the Mets for the best record in the National League. And then overall for best record in baseball, they're up 5 games on the Astros at this point. There's just no need for it. So I think that we're very likely to see Trey Turner sit. And in addition, we could also see Freddie Freeman sit because he played in the first part of the doubleheader. We could see Justin Turner out of the lineup. So let's see what the lineup ends up looking like. If it's the starters mostly out, I think Jameson becomes intriguing. If all those guys are in, then no, I'm not going to be touching Jameson. Any further thoughts at pitcher, or have we got it all covered at this point?
Yeah, I think we've got it all covered. There's, no need to go to the Coors Field pitchers on this slate. We've got plenty of directions to go. Corbin is the one other guy that you could throw into the mix as like, is he tournament viable? Maybe, with the potential for strikeouts in that Atlanta lineup, but I don't see it. And you're talking about a really thin option where on a day that I don't think you need to go there. It wouldn't knock me out of my chair completely to see Patrick Corbin put up an okay start here against the Braves, but I think there's just so much more probability that the Braves are just going to go out and tattoo him, and I'm going to be invested in the Braves stack that I don't need to chase the Corbin upside on this one.
All right, so let's move on over to the stacks. But first, if you guys haven't done it yet, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And once again, shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. So let's go on over to the projections we have over at Stokastic. And let's see if we could find some of the value over at Prize Picks. So we've got projections up for Prize Picks for baseball over on the site. Pulling those up right now and seeing what looks good.
While you do that, I'll just read what 720 Red Dog is saying in the chat. These streams are vehicles to sell a website to get you deeper info to make you more money. They tend to talk in obtuse terms about the players on the slate, then say buy the premium pass to get insider info. Have either of us said that once during this show, outside of maybe a plug that you read at the beginning? Have we not talked specifically in stats and very specifically giving away the ownership information? The hell are you talking about, 720 Red Dog?
If you guys would like access to all the great Stokastic Plus tools and content that we have for every single DFS sport out there, you can sign up for a Platinum Pass right now using the promo code MLB Live. It'll get you 50% off your first week of the pass. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Stokastic Plus today. But listen, we do have, and I kind of joking by turning that into the ad read here, but at the same time too, I mean, I'm just telling you guys who I'm playing. We're backing it up with information also. And to be honest, I build all my lineups off the tools we have on the site. So now I understand what Red Dog might be saying. It's not as simple as, for basketball value, for instance, because I assume he's talking about, like NBA projections. There's relatively close to sure things in basketball. Sure. There's no equivalent to that in MLB. There is no, oh, look, there's this min-price guy who's in the lineup now. Let's play him in 100% of the lineups. It just doesn't really exist for baseball. So I know the way that I'm playing lineups and the way Terry does as well, and the way a lot of the guys do here, is we're leveraging some of the data and tools that we have on the site and trying to figure out how we want to allocate our exposures over the course of 150 lineups. If you're not playing 150, it could even be over the course of 20 lineups or even one lineup if you're hand building a lineup, because ownership becomes so important in baseball because there is so much variance. So it's more about weighing probabilities and likelihood of outcomes versus what the field is going to do. It's not as simple as in NBA being like, oh, I'm playing X, Y, and Z, and just these are the guys today. It's not like this is the pay up, this is the value. It's, it's more nuanced than that in baseball. So that is something to consider also, is that there's not going to be a time where I'm ever going to be like, I'm building 100% Yankee stack because this is the team today. Whereas in basketball, Jokic gets rolled out to Marcus Cousins starting at center and min-price. Yeah, he's going to be in all my lineups. So they're just inherently different ways that you'd be playing DFS across the different sports.
To put a point on that, imagine a player in basketball coming out at a $200 salary like we saw Wander Franco go the other day. And Wander Franco was like 15% owned on that slate. I had him in like 75% of my lineups, but even I didn't go to like 100% because you don't need that in baseball. In basketball, it would be completely bananas for anybody out of the 50,000 people in the tournament to not have that in their lineup. So, I mean, it just works differently. But I mean, I feel like we talk in very specific terms about what we're doing. We're giving away the plays. We're giving away the ownership that is behind the paywall through these shows, the top stacks. I don't know what more you could want from a free show.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. I mean, if you want to refund, a 720 Red Dog, I'll give you back. I'll personally PayPal you all of the money that you spent to watch the show today. It's yours. You could have it back. It's a free show. We're doing it online. And so the other thing too is the reason we have jobs and we're here is like there has to be some source of income. We're not just sitting here for fun, giving out all of our MLB information or for other sports. Like it should be fairly common knowledge that, we also want you guys to sign up for the site, but at the same time too, we're using it to make money. So it's not like I don't think there's no sort of thing like where we're trying to put a blindfold over you. I think we're fairly transparent with what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean the site's branded all over the YouTube stream here. We point to it, but we don't. I don't feel like we shill all that much. There's a lot of streams where they shill a whole hell of a lot more and a whole hell of a lot. Harder.
When Josh Engleman's hosting, a lot of shilling going on. But here, we're hanging out. We're talking about baseball. Let's hit on the stacks and starting with the Coors Field game, which is going to be the game that a lot of people want to play. Implied team total for both these teams north of 6 runs at this point. The two highest implied team totals on the slate. Actually, I want to refresh the ownership right before we talk about it here to see if anything has changed. I mentioned before, the team that I'm playing in single entry is the Colorado Rockies. That's my 5-man stack right now. We have, so right now the Rockies over on DK are projected for 9% ownership compared to 21% ownership for the Giants, making them the most popular team on DK. For FanDuel purposes, it does look a little bit different for this reason. The Giants are just a little bit more appropriately priced. So they're still the most popular team on FanDuel, but it's not that number north of 20%. Instead, they're 17.5% with a 15% chance to be a top stack. So we'll talk about both sides of the game, but starting with the San Francisco Giants, Terry, the most popular offense on the slate, and also the team that has the highest projected top stack odds in our top stacks tool. How are you handling San Francisco?
They'll be in the mix for me, but it's a spot where I'm probably going to be below the field and comfortably below. I think I'll have some shares of the heart of the lineup here, of course, with Thairo Estrada, Evan Longoria, Wilmer Flores, JD Davis, David VR. Once you get to VR on the FanDuel side of things, it does thin out into single digit ownership. So there's a little bit of offset around VR. Joey Bart. I think Mike Yastrzemski is pretty interesting in this lineup at 6.8%, 3,100 down toward the bottom of the lineup here. So yeah, it'll probably be me living more toward those bottom end, lower owned guys than in the top 4 hitters of the lineup. We're all aggressively owned over a quarter of all lineups. On DK, it's a little bit more stark because of what you're saying. The pricing is just a little bit lower. So you're getting teens ownership down through Joey Bart and then Yastrzemski and Brinson at the bottom of the lineup, both in single digits. I do think it's playable, but for me, I want to be under the field and I'm more interested in honestly in the other side of this one.
Yeah, and for me, the Rockies, the ones this is my favorite stack of the day. This is the team that I think warrants the most exposure. We've got a Rockies team that we're expected to go against Carlos Rodon. He's not pitching. Who knows what the reason is? Is he hurt? Potentially. He's been hurt a lot, although he's stayed relatively healthy this year. The healthiest year of his career, and the overall numbers for him are outstanding. But it's a big boost for the Rockies not having to go against Carlos Rodon. And typically, when we're seeing a spot where it's a bullpen game, it's oftentimes kind of trickier than I think a lot of people would realize, but it's different when it's Carlos Rodon was expected to start and he got scratched. And instead, we've got Brebbia, who's going to be starting for the Giants, or at least is expected to work some middle relief here. And it's just a step down from Rodon to now what the bullpen game is going to be for the Giants. And I'm not exactly sure if the field is going to get there based on our ownership projections. They're not as much as they should. Single digit ownership going to the Rockies. One of the most positively leveraged teams in the entire slate in our top stacks tool. I love getting to the Rockies. It is going to be my most rostered team today. Is that where you're at also?
Yeah, I don't know that they'll be my most rostered team. That award might go to the Atlanta Braves, and I'll have some like Yankees and some of their other spots that we'll talk about. But I do definitely want to be on the Rockies side of things. On DraftKings, I think I would be aggressively on it. I think it probably would be my most rostered spot. What I don't love on FanDuel, you don't have anybody with multi-position, and you've got 2 first basemen in the lineup. So it depends on what you're looking to combine them with, but you've got to use your util spot if you want to have Cron and Toglia both in the lineup, who I do think are 2 of the key sources of power in going to that stack. And I would like the idea of having both of them in my lineup. On DK, you get outfield eligibility on Toglia. You don't have to worry about it. You've also got multi-position on Montero and on Ryan McMahon. McMahon at second base has a ton of value on that DK slate. You only get him at third base. He's cheap on FanDuel. He's very popular. He's cheap. But losing that second base eligibility and the ability to it makes it really difficult to stack this team with, let's say, the Braves, which is what I was trying to do manually there for my placeholder build, because you want to have Matt Olson in there. So you can't have both first basemen. You want want to have Austin Riley in there, so you're not going to have Ryan McMahon if you can't have him at second base. So on FanDuel, it just becomes a little bit of a clunkier stack from a just how the combinations work, but I'll have plenty. I mean, it's an under-owned spot. They're still at Coors Field. There are under-owned individuals like Jonathan Daza hitting second. Randall Grichuk, arguably at 10%, is a little under-owned. Toglia definitely under-owned at 7%. So there are spots that I really like getting to. It's just a matter of how they combine with other things.
Yeah, and I mean, as for the Braves spot against Patrick Corbin, it's clearly a very good one. They have the highest top stack odds today for us of any team that isn't at Coors Field, and it's still going to be quite popular. I was a little surprised, though, to see that we have the Braves picking up more ownership than what the Rockies do, just because, well, while Patrick Corbin does suck, the Rockies are at Coors Field. So I do think it's a spot where, for me, I'd rather get there. We right now have the Rockies about 11.5% top stack odds on DK, right around 12% on FanDuel, compared to the 7 to 8% for the Atlanta Braves. So I do personally have a little bit lean towards the Rockies, but it's clearly a very good spot for the Braves as well. I want to ask you, of the teams that are very chalky today, outside of the ones that we've talked about, so we've also got a team like the Twins that are picking up a bunch of ownership. Do you think any of these offenses are going too highly owned in large field tournaments?
Not really. I'm looking at this is the FanDuel. Let me jump over to the DK board here and talk about that slate a little bit. So, I mean, with the Giants drawing 20%, I agree with Adam that the Braves will probably be a little bit more popular than we've got. Maybe the Giants will be a little bit less popular. But, you know, if it's 10, 12%, I don't think that's over ownership against Corbin. I just think that's appropriate. I think the Twins, between the combination of the matchup against Greinke and some of their pricing, definitely makes some sense for them to be popular. And everybody else is in single digits. So you can go pretty much anywhere you want in terms of team ownership collectively, and then just watch out for the ownership bums. Like, you know, I'm sure Aaron Judge is pulling 20 some odd % ownership while most of the Yankees around him are in single digits. That all works fine as a stack. Just watch out, you know, when you're going to Judge, know that he's a highly owned player. So maybe you use Judge more frequently in the lineups where you're not going to the chalkiest of chalk pitchers, right? Don't use Judge, Castillo, and Morton all in the same lineup. Maybe that's one where you go to Carrasco and save yourself some ownership at the pitcher spot. Then you do whatever you want with the bats. So it's just a matter of doing that. Not that I'm advocating for going to Yankee stacks without Aaron Judge in them.
I realized I forgot to actually, we got so sidetracked before I realized that we forgot to go over our favorite prize picks plays. So I'm going to circle back to that. We've talked about the chalky offense. We're going to talk about some contrarian ones, but Terry went on a little tangent.
We did. That's my fault.
Well, no, it's my fault as well, because I'm still supposed to be steering the ship here. And I totally forgot that I was in the middle of one read, and I thought it'd be funny to jump to another one because of all the comments and everything. And I forgot my modus operandi in there, but let's talk about the prize picks and some of the props available here. And I want to get some of your thoughts on this. And the one we have for tonight that projects out the best for us is under 92.5 pitches for Mike Clevinger. So let me look at some of the recent games for Clevinger. I have noticed that we have a lot of them that we end up liking the over-unders on some of the pitch stat. Oh, by the way, I like this one on Clevinger, looking at some of it, because I do think this is one of the ones that we could box score watch more than other stuff. Like you don't want to box score watch just strictly strikeouts or strictly fantasy points or anything like that. But Clevinger's over-under is 92.5 pitches. So he went 94 last start, but his starts before that, 90, 68, 83, 91, 89. We haven't projected for 88 today. 92.5 does seem a touch high for me in terms of projected pitches for Mike Clevinger.
Yeah, and I tell you what, I mean, just, you know, baked into that, of course, as you're looking at it in the box score there, but worth pointing out, he's just not been that good this year. 19.7% strikeout rate, a 4.71 xFIP, a 4.27% home run rate, 39.6% hard hit allowed, a 1.22 whip. So he's putting guys on base, and he's going up against a very, very good Cardinals team. So yeah, I think there's reason to believe that Clevinger could get knocked around early. It might be a reason to go to a very under-owned Cardinals stack, to be quite honest. And then on that spot, absolutely, I like that under for that pitch count, because that's around what he averages in a good start. So with the idea that they could get to him easily enough, yeah, like that a lot.
And then we've got an over here, and this is just a funny picture. So if I were to tell you, Terry, we like the over for strikeouts on Dylan Bundy, you'd probably feel not great about it. But the over-under for strikeouts on Bundy is 2.5. That is a very low number against a pretty shitty Kansas City Royals offense. So let me pull up some Dylan Bundy numbers here. I don't know that any pitcher who's stretched out should have an over-under of 2.5 strikeouts against the Royals.
Yeah, it was going to have to be about 2.5 for me to be somewhat interested. I've got him sitting a little bit above 4, and I feel like that might be generous. So yeah, with hesitation, I would probably go there just based on that being so low. That's almost silly.
Yeah, and by the way, our projection on Bundy today, we have him projected for 3.25 strikeouts, and still like the over a lot as a play over on price. Like 3.25 is a very low number, but like, should we say that any pitcher should be projected for like 2 strikeouts, or like it's such a low number on the 2.5. We like the over there for Bundy. So those are some of the ones that stand out over on Prize Picks based on our projections. So let's get back to the stacks and talk about some lower owned teams, but let's address some of the questions that we're getting in chat. Also, if anybody's watching in Discord and wants to ask us questions, just tag me on those. We can answer those. But the team that a lot of people are asking us about are the Baltimore Orioles. It seems like we've got 5-6 people saying they want to play Baltimore today. I could back that. This is one of the more positively leveraged, low-owned teams on the slate. So a team like the Rockies we have as being positively leveraged, but it's also a team that's already picking up some ownership. The Orioles today, over on DK, less than 4% ownership with 5.5% top stack odds. There's some positive leverage to be had there. Also going up a pitcher in Joey Wentz, who I'm not all that high on in general. And then FanDuel slate, 3% ownership, 5.5% top stack odds. Guys, I'm going to agree with you in chat here. The Orioles do look like one of the better contrarian stacks to get to today. How do you feel about them, Terry?
Yeah, it was a spot that Adam and I talked about a little bit this morning, and I do think they're interesting. They're very low owned on both sites. They're affordable on, especially on the FanDuel slate. A little bit maybe more relatively highly priced on DK, where you get like Rushman at 5,000 because he's a catcher. But I think it's a good spot to go to. Wentz 4 starts, 17 1/3, 21.4% strikeout rate, 3.79 xFIP, a 1.43% home run rate. But within that, he's still allowed a 40% hard hit. So I think he's just managed to avoid the launch angle, managed to avoid the barrels a little bit. I like the upside for this Orioles lineup, and it's a pretty good version of it with Gunnar Henderson leading off, which is kind of interesting. Adam mentioned on the last show that he struggled in the minors a little bit against lefties, but this is a pretty weak lefty. So I think this is a good spot for the Orioles, and leading off with him, Mountcastle, Santander, Rushman, Jesus Aguilar, Austin Hayes hitting 7th. Not anything to hate about this lineup. You get a very cheap Jorge Mateo if you want to go there for the wraparound. 13 home runs and 30 stolen bases on the season. Only a 271 on base percentage and 86 WRC plus, but he provides interesting fantasy numbers from time to time. So yeah, top to bottom, I can get to the Orioles.
Yeah, and then something else that I just want to add is a news item, because we briefly talked about Aaron Savali before. Looks like he's gonna be throwing around mid-70s pitches today. 70 to 80s is pitch count. So somebody just to follow up on that. Safe to assume no interest in him now that we have that pitch count.
Yeah, none whatsoever. I was already not very interested and not planning on going there. And with that, yeah, I would have no issues with taking him out of the pool entirely.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to make sure that we double back on that and give out that kind of update. Basti G in our Discord channel saying, for the late slate, Cardinals the best stack, Dodgers seem like a fish play. So I haven't looked specifically at the late slate. So let's see for the night slate what is going on. So, well, first it's only 2 teams playing, and that's the late night slate, I guess he's talking about. It's always confusing the way that the spread's like, the turbo slate, the express slate, the late slate, the very late slate. Like I have no context. So just tell me what time the slate starts. How about that? Right. Tell me why don't they just label it as the 8:40 slate Eastern time? The 7 that I could relate to. I don't know what a turbo slate is supposed to mean.
Yep, brilliant. And that would make it so much easier to like sort them on the website, for example. Yeah, very, very much on board with that decision.
But actually, I don't think the Cardinals and the Dodgers are on the same late slate. Let me see. See, this is also where it gets confusing. The late slate, like which one are we talking about? Because when I'm just looking at like what slate do you see that which slate is it the Cardinals and Dodgers are both on?
Not the 940, which is it the 805? No. I don't think they're on a slate together outside of the main. Oh no, I'm sorry. They're on the 940 on DK because the Dodgers game, the second game of a doubleheader for the Dodgers isn't on the FanDuel slate. That's why I didn't see it.
Okay, yeah.
So on DK, they're on the same 940 slate.
All right, there we go. So the 3-game 940 slate. Yeah, so we've got Cardinals. Okay, yeah, there we go. Cardinals, Dodgers, Mariners, A's, and then the Dodgers D-backs game. So we're talking about that one. Let's see what the ownership looks like there. Oh my, I could only imagine what Luis Castillo's ownership is going to be on a 3-game slate tonight for drafting for people off the roster, 2 pitchers.
100%.
He's gonna be close. He's not even the most expensive pitcher. Most expensive pitcher there is Wainwright. All right, so
that's broken.
Here we go. All right, here's the slate. Here it is. All right, so yeah, we've got by far the most popular team on that late slate is the Dodgers. I actually might want to play this slate now just to throw some Dre Jameson lineups in if the Dodgers are going to be 33% owned. But yeah, based on our projections, the Cardinals definitely do look like the best stack. I know Terry briefly talked about it before as them being a team to potentially get to as a contrarian look in large field tournaments for the main slate. But yeah, for the night slate, we have them with the 3rd highest top stack odds and the 2nd lowest owned team, the only team picking up less ownership. Surprise, surprise, the Oakland A's against Luis Castillo. So yeah, I'm going to agree with you there. I think the Cardinals look like a great play for that small late slate.
Yeah, that sounds like a fantastic spot, and that might be one that I have to throw into as well there. So yeah, good call out by that person. And you get some interesting hitters in that lineup too. Like you get Alec Burleson, Min Price on both sides hitting 7th. So definitely a lefty bat that I can get to. So far in his 22 plate appearances, he hasn't been all that productive, but anybody hitting in that lineup from the left side of the plate at Min Price in this spot, I'm happy to include with all those premium righties in a stack. So definitely an interesting lineup that is not getting any attention.
All right, let's get back to talking about the main slate here for the final, 10 to 12 minutes here. And Terry, what are the other contrarian offenses that are really standing out to you? We talked about the Orioles being one to highlight. And by the way, I totally agree with Chad. I think that is a great spot to get to. Who are some of the other low-owned teams that you like?
I don't think the Yanks outside of Aaron Judge are getting all that much attention on FanDuel. They're a little bit more popular because you're getting still Giancarlo Stanton at 3,100. He's getting a lot of attention. Rizzo at 3,700 is getting a little bit of attention. Everybody else easy to get to in single digits. And they're a little bit healthier. You've got Gleyber Torres, you've got Josh Donaldson in addition to Stanton, Rizzo, and Judge. So that's a solid 5-man right there. Oswaldo Cabrera is a serviceable hitter, I think. And I think he's going to grow as a hitter. I don't think he's going to be a star, but I think he's going to be a serviceable multi-position kind of a player. Harrison Bader back in into the Yankees lineup for the first time back in our DFS lives. 15 stolen bases, 5 home runs, and 264 plate appearances earlier in the season with the Cards. So I like getting to the Yanks. They're a little bit under-owned. They're significantly less owned on DK, where only Judges in double digits at 21%. Everybody else in the low to mid single digits. So very easy spot to get to with the Yanks there. And then let's jump over to the old top stacks tool here so that we can be specific about things that are behind the paywall. You're getting very low ownership on the New York Mets going up against what is ultimately a bullpen game for the Brewers here. So I think they're somewhat interesting if we're just talking about good teams in good spots. The Cards are definitely on that list, but we've talked about them fairly thoroughly. Arguably, the Padres, just given the star caliber of that lineup and some of the major upside against a pitcher like Waino, who is very good, in my opinion, as a professional pitcher, but more of a real life pitcher who can pitch through a bunch of innings cleanly, but he's gettable. He doesn't strike out a bunch of guys and they don't strike out that much. So if we're hunting balls in play, if we're hunting run creation situations, I think they're interesting there. And then a lot of the other spots are popular. I'll have a ton of Braves. We've talked about that a lot through the show. They're very popular, but that's another team I don't want to run through stacks without mentioning them again.
Yeah, so I think that all makes sense. One team, did you mention the Mets there?
I did.
Okay,
yep,
yeah, so in terms of teams that are super low owned, the Mets are the one that stand out to me in terms of them also just being crazy low owned. So you talked about the Cardinals briefly before. The Mets only project for 1% ownership going up against Brent Suter. And there was a point in time where Suter was pretty good. And he's 33 years old now. I just don't think that he's quite the caliber he was a couple of years ago. Now, it's not to say he sucks or anything like that. He is going to pitch, more so in an opener role. And then we're going to see some more of the Brewers bullpen. But still, for him, who's likely going to pitch a couple innings in middle relief here, 3.92 ERA, 3.53 expected ERA. He used to be a little bit more stretched out at one point in time. I think we could probably see a couple innings out of him. If the Mets get to him, I don't think we're going to see the best relievers from the Brewers today. Also, the Brewers season is totally falling apart. There was a point in time where I thought they were just by far the best team in the NL Central. Not the case anymore. Things have really gone south for them. But just based on the ownership for the Mets at 1%, it's a team to be overweight too. So I like them as well. But in terms of offenses, I think we've kind of covered most of the things that make the most sense to me. Any points for you that we have not yet hit on that you want to bring up?
I'm just getting the sort put together here so I can give some people at least some of the organic way that this is coming up. A team that we talked about this morning that we didn't bring up on this show actually is the Los Angeles Angels. I think they're somewhat interesting in this spot as well. And it looks like I'm going to be getting to them quite aggressively here. So I'm going to have to trim that back a little bit. But you've got the obvious superstars in Mike Trout, Shohei Ohtani. We've got Taylor Ward in there. You've got Mike Ford hitting from the left side of the plate against the lefty. I'm not sure how much I like that, but he's dead minimum on DK. He's 2,100 on FanDuel. It's a guy we've seen hit major league home runs in the past. Joe Adell is a guy who we haven't seen hit as many major league home runs as I would have expected him to at this point, but I do still believe that there's power in that bat. Weird sneaky catcher in Max Stassi, who gets a decent amount of premium contacts. So they're not my favorite team in the world to go to, but I think I will have some Angels. I'm not going to get to anywhere near what the sort is giving me organically here, but I did want to throw them back into the mix going up against Cole Ragans from the left side, 14.9% strikeout rate and a 12.3% walk rate in 25 and a third this year. That's targetable for sure. So the Angels are somewhat on the board.
Yeah, I think Ragans is terrible. So
Yes.
we've got his numbers this year. And I talk about this all the time. I am very skeptical of pitchers that have kind of toiled around in the minor leagues, not gotten called up. Although Ragans isn't that old, he's 24, but still guys that have spent time in the minor leagues and have just never gotten called up to the big leagues. And also, not just they haven't gotten called up to the big leagues, but also are unranked prospects. And Ragans had really shitty numbers in AA last year, like really terrible. So last year, 9 appearances for Ragans in AA, 5.7 ERA, 6.34 expected ERA. His strikeout rate was 19.9%. And he also walked 12% of the hitters he faced. If you're a pitcher in the minor leagues and you are not able to generate strikeouts and you go those kind of runs, it just doesn't really bode well for your big league.
And that was
prospects.
his age 23 season in the minors.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
and then
that's not a good sign.
And then his results this year, 5.68 ERA in the big leagues, 5.37 expected ERA. I don't think any of that should come as a surprise. We look at the projection at Zips, for instance, for him in terms of his talent as a real life pitcher. Then with a 5.68 ERA, 5.39 FIP. I don't think this guy is any good. The Angels offense, it's been massively disappointing this year. I don't even know if we could say disappointing outside of Trout and Ohtani because we don't really expect anything outside of those guys at this point. Early in the year, it looked like they were going to be decent this year. It all came apart really quickly. Trout got hurt for a while, but still, it's a team that is just not been good on offense. But I think Colt Ragans is significantly worse than what the Angels are as an offense.
Yep, absolutely. And it's about those guys that I named. You know, Taylor Ward had that monster start to his season and then cooled off dramatically through the last like 2 or 3 months. But he's strung together a couple decent weeks, and overall the numbers still look pretty good. 41.2% hard hit with an 11% barrel, 18 home runs and 498 plate appearances. For like a month and change at the beginning of the season, he looked like the second coming of Mike Trout following him in the lineup. But that isn't the case here. But I do think he's playable at 3,900, 2,900 on FanDuel, 7% ownership. That's easy enough to get to. Not my favorite lineup, but I will have lots of them because it's difficult to get them out of here given what they're paired with too. That's the other thing. They're pairing together with some of these premium teams pretty well.
Who are you? So outside of Trout and Ohtani, I know you mentioned Taylor Ward. Like who are the cheapy guys they're getting to? Because it can't all be Trout and Ohtani.
No, I mean, Joe Adell at dead minimum price going up against a lefty. I do still believe in his right-handed power. He's got a 37.6% hard hit, which is around the league average, a 9.9% barrel, which is okay. 7 home runs and 245 plate appearances. But this is a kid who was brought up as a premium right-handed power hitter, like extremely premium right-handed power hitter. He just hasn't gotten there at this level yet. So I'll have some of him. I'll have begrudgingly shares of Matt Duffy because he's triple position eligibility and 2,200 on FanDuel. So they're just easy enough to build value guys in around the Trout, Ohtani, and Ward situation. And then Rengifo at the top of the lineup, 2,700 multi-position. I'll take what I get of him.
And, by the way, I have to address this. Thomas Kane in chat says, you guys should train MMA with Pete the Heat. He's a monster. I'll tell you who I train with, Alex Baker. Nobody more ferocious in the fighting streets than Alex Baker. He is undefeated in street fights. There's not even a single opponent that's left alive in a street fight against Alex. If you guys want to know who you don't want to fuck with, it's Alex Baker. That's the toughest guy around. 720 Red Dog. He does have a little bit of a follow-up comment, not related to DFS this time. Terry. Okay. Do you have a Fight Club DVD behind you on the wall?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
I mean, I don't know exactly where it would be, but I probably have multiple copies of it, and I probably have the like director's cut, fancy fucking like Criterion collection or something like that. It's an excellent movie.
Yeah. Bulldogger. Oh my God, this guy thinks RoboCop Gregory Rodriguez would win in a fight versus Alex. You guys haven't seen Alex fight. Zero chance. I know RoboCop looked tough over the weekend. He had that crazy cut that looked like a unibrow. He was able to fight through it, even though the doctor almost stopped, and he ended up knocking out Inchiquani. But either way, yeah, I'm telling you, Alex is undefeated. He's never lost a fight. That's somebody you don't want to mess with.
I thought you were transitioning us into a conversation about RoboCop, and I got really excited for a minute, like the movie RoboCop, since we were talking.
No. Gregory Rodriguez, the guy who, some of the worst cuts I've ever seen in UFC over the weekend. But yeah, one guy had a cut that literally went from one eyebrow to the other eyebrow, and it just looked like he had an Anthony Davis unibrow going across his face because of how deep the cut was. But
that's a solid look.
I know people like to hear home run picks, so I think we could close out with that. But one thing I just want to ask you real quick before we get to that, has anything surprised you in your builds, Terry, as you're finishing them out? Anything that came up that you weren't expecting?
No, I'm trying to just juggle my pitching a little bit here. I was getting that massive share of Luis Castillo that I was expecting, and then just how they were pitching, how they're priced and how they're projected for me. I wasn't getting organically a ton of Dylan Cease or some of the other premium options that I want to get to. So I'm forcing them up a little bit, and I'm trimming my Castillo, but that was kind of expected. So nothing overly shocking here. Mostly going to have a lot of the teams that we talked about, kind of like what we were saying.
Yeah, and then we've got Cactus Jack in the Discord channel saying, if we're off Savali, does that make you like the Chicago White Sox? So if you're just playing a handful of lineups, the White Sox are not one of the teams I would be keying in on. I think you can make a case to be a little bit overweight to the field. And then we've got them with 1% ownership, 2% top stack odds. They're also fairly expensive today, which is a little bit prohibitive, at least in terms of the guys we give a shit about. But also when it comes to Savali, the reason that we didn't like him, it was because of a pitch count. It's not because we think he's going to get his ass kicked, although that's a very live outcome. But at the same time, too, so the main reason we're talking about Savali before was because of the pitch count and the fact that it came out that he's expected to throw 70 to 80 pitches. So Savali, just because we're not playing, it's not for the reasons of wanting to stack against him. But are the White Sox an important team in your build?
Not important. No, I wouldn't like hustle them out of any constructions that I had here if I was getting to them a decent amount, which they're probably in the mix here, but I'm not looking at that screen right now and I'm trying to get these lineups in. But yeah, they weren't really popping for me. And Savali, decent real life pitcher, has the propensity to get blown up from time to time, but they haven't also been all that great this season. Adam and I were talking about that as well. It was a team we were both going to quite a bit through the year, and neither one of us felt like we really got there all that often with them. So a couple of very good hitters in that lineup, but not coming up a ton for me and not a priority. I'll take what I get of them.
All right, so let's wrap up with this, Terry. Home run pick of the day. Who's going yard? What's the Dong pick of the night?
So since he is the very top of the board by 4 full points of my home run points, however they work mathematically, I will say that Mr. Aaron Judge is going to hit number 60 tonight, but that's not going to be my pick. I'll give you a more interesting one than that. What about Kerry Carpenter? That's a weird one.
Oh, okay. That was not who I was
sitting at a 12, 2 above the magic number. The guy I was going to go to before I saw him hanging there was Mitch Haniger. I think he's maybe interesting from Seattle.
All right. So I'm not going to get Coors Field. That's a bit of a cop out.
Yeah.
Who do I think is live to homer that would also help my lineups? Carlos Correa going up against Zach Greinke. Well, what's left of Zach Greinke. Correa also has hit the ball extremely well as of late. Correa looks like multiple hits in something like 5 of his last 8 games. And then also Correa got projected for modest ownership, 14% today. I like the matchup against Zach Greinke. He's my most rostered shortstop today. He's in my single entry lineup as a one-off. So Carlos Correa, that is going to be my home run pick of the day. Other than that, guys, we reached the end of the show. Thank you very much for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Good luck tonight, guys, and we'll be back here tomorrow breaking down more baseball slates.